A portion of the building is to be located on the corner of the Lindo Street right of way. And the building couldn't be moved or adjusted because of other existing improvements that were launched that would be in the way of that. So the planning commission approved it with the condition that the rancheria will enter into agreement with the city or obtain an easement to the satisfaction of the city attorney for Lindo Street right of way for a portion of the project. The city attorney, so for like the stormwater project, there's a landowner agreement in place for the rancheria's work and improvements in the city right of way. But because this is a new building, the city attorney was worried about liability issues, and so he preferred and transfer so that the interpretive center would not be on city property. So city staff and rancheria staff met in the harbor and discussed the issue. I believe there was a government meeting as well with the city council, tribal council. And so a tentative agreement was reached to exchange about 1,200 square feet of the southwest corner of the Lindo Street right of way to accommodate the interpretive center. And then the city would obtain an equal amount of land that would incorporate a portion of the Trinidad Head Trail that runs from the parking lot up to the access road. And the stairs at the top of that are on rancheria property. So it's a lot line adjustment, but it's basically an exchange between the city and the rancheria. Just a note on the map, normally with a lot line adjustment, you know, I've got parcel numbers and I've got areas and we've got a little bit more information, but the parcel, so the outer boundaries of the rancheria's properties, including the city property, that's pretty well established, that's been surveyed. But the internal boundaries of the rancheria properties are that parcel map is what I normally look at and assume is at least reasonably correct, and it's really not. So I can't really say, like, it still shows Bay Street and the city abandoned Bay Street. Well, I think it was. But how Bay Street was dispersed, it's usually down the center line, but then there's that alley. So how Bay Street was dispersed to the various properties, exactly which parcels obtain that, I'm a little unsure, so I couldn't be exact with that information in my staff report. But I think we're still pretty comfortable with the, in concept, this land exchange. A survey will be completed once the lot line adjustment is approved to determine exactly where those boundaries are in terms of the trail and the interpretive center. And so the exact amount of land and the exact boundaries and what parcels they're going to will be determined as part of the survey. And the city engineer will have to review and approve that. And then in addition, a lot line adjustment requires a coastal development permit. And just as a reminder, the city is not authorized to issue coastal development permits in the harbor area, at least in the portion zone commercial. And so that will have to go to the Coastal Commission. So the rancheria is working on getting their application together to submit to the Coastal Commission for the interpretive center, and it will include the lot line adjustment. But city approval needs to come before that. After the I think normally with a lot line adjustment, we have to look at setbacks, but really the commercial zone doesn't have setbacks except in the front, and the front line is defined as the narrowest inch, but the Lindo doesn't actually meet the definition of a street. So I don't think we have to worry about setbacks. The parcels that are going to get smaller are well above the minimum parcel size. There's one small parcel near Bay Street might get bigger. So we don't have to worry about minimum parcel sizes, setbacks. So the findings that are required to be made by the city planner listed on page 5, I believe those can be made. And then the city engineer, like I said, the city engineer's approval is also required, but he's gonna need some of that survey and title reports and things like that. So that's been a condition of approval. Really doesn't affect anything else down there, no landscaping, no, there's no ground disturbance, wastewater. It's not gonna affect anything in the ground, so none of those regulations apply. So staff recommendation is for approval of the lot line adjustment. The city council did approve it in concept as the landowner as well. A portion of the lot line adjustment might be in the city's CDP jurisdiction. I forgot to mention that. So Rancheria will need to request a consolidated CDP, so it didn't make sense for the city to issue a CDP. So Coastal Commission has a process for a CDP process jurisdiction boundaries. Standard conditions of approval again, recommendations of the city engineer shall be required. A survey will be completed to determine exact boundaries. Oh, and there was one other issue that came up. There's an easement from Galindo to the pier, a public access easement that was granted to the city from the Rancheria that I wasn't aware of when the interpretive center was approved. And the description isn't really good. It says northerly and easterly, so it could jog. But if it's a straight line, then the interpretive center could be within that public access easement. So if that's the case, that will need to be surveyed as well, and the easement would need to be adjusted if the interpretive center pushes on that easement. And then all other permits, so the coastal development permits will be secured. Is there any questions?
All right, open up to the commissioners. Yeah, do you have any history on the Bay Street abandonment, or not really?
Well, I had there, the city passed an ordinance in 1912 to abandon Bay Streets. And I mean, that was before the pier was even constructed. So I don't know. I mean, there's probably the minutes somewhere in the box. I don't know the whole history. Let's see, I think it was in 90, somewhere more in maybe in the 2000s. I think it was noticed that it still shows up on the AP map. So the city re-recorded that, I believe, to make sure that it was documented. So I think it's pretty clear that it's abandoned. It's just not clear where those areas, what parcels those areas went.
Gotcha.
So I have just a couple of questions real fast. What parcel is the Galindo easement?
Well,
And that's not as important as to make sure that if we were to look up that full description, would the easement be part of the legal description?
it should show up in the title report. Yeah. Yeah. So if you look at the parcel map, it'd be 12, but really, so if you look, there's some dashed lines on this parcel map with the numbers 36, 37, 41, 42, little triangles 40. Those are the actual original parcels as was laid out in the 1800s for the city of Trinidad. So I think those are actually, so it's probably on actually parcel 41. I've learned actually quite a lot about parcel maps versus, actual parcels. I've always assumed these were, you could base a little bit. I know they're not accurate, but I didn't know they were this inaccurate as these are. And really the parcels have no legal standing. It's just a tax, you know, it's basically just a tax and land use thing. And so these parcels don't actually have a legal basis necessarily. It's these underlying parcels that are the legal.
The legal description.
Yeah.
Okay. So when I look at this, on that parcel map, it says 25-foot easement, City of Trinidad, and it says 727.2. Is that the easement we're talking about, or is it something in addition to?
On which map? Sorry.
I guess it's this one, the parcel map, right?
Page 13.
Oh, yeah. So that is the easement that was granted by Hallmark to the city's stormwater outfall. So, and it shows up as part of Galindo Street right away, but it's not. I mean, again, that's incorrect. Incorrect on this map. It is just an easement, but yeah, it went from Galindo to the city's stormwater outfall. That is different.
So the two separate easements that we're talking about right there in that area. Okay. Oh, and then just one last question. I think you answered it, but I just want to confirm that when I look at condition of approval 4, so the city no easement from the end of the right of way to the pier will be surveyed and delineated. If the interpretive center will interfere with the easement, then it will need to be revised to the satisfaction of the city council. You are referring to the easement and not the location or the design of the interpretive center, correct?
That's correct. Yes. And like I said, it's pretty, the description of the easement, it says from the center line at the mean high tide line of the pier to the center line of where Galindo and Bay Street would connect. But then but from the pier to Galindo, it says in a northerly and easterly direction. So it's not a good description as to, is that northerly then easterly, or is it northeasterly? So it's really not clear how that's written. So again, I think it just needs to be clarified as part of this process, really.
Does that easement not, excuse me, isn't that easement senior to the potential development of the interpretive center?
Yes. But I think the purpose is for public access and, to have people walk across a lawn where there's already storage and buildings. It would make more sense to put the easement, on roadways that are already there. So I think it would make sense to move the easement as opposed to the interpretive.
And that was the one of the conditions of approval when we approved interpretive center, correct? That we could look at the easement and adjust it if necessary.
I didn't know about that easement when we.
That's what's confusing.
Yeah,
what were we talking about then?
I think that was this window. So it was so that the city. So when we did that approval, we had recently just done a landowner agreement with the Rancheria for the stormwater improvements that are on the Galindo right of way. And so I assumed it would be something similar. But in this case, the city attorney wanted actual land exchange. So it turned into a lot line adjustment instead of an easement for land.
So, with regard to the Galindo to the pier easement, it's the intent that easement with the development of the lot line adjustment map, that easement will be more accurately described than it is currently. Sounds or something. Sorry, I was just asking if that easement would be more accurately described than it is currently used, rather than just vague direction.
Yeah, that would be the intent. And maybe it's not city council, maybe it's not something that has to go to city council, maybe it's city attorney or city engineer. Make it more appropriate in that condition.
you have any?
I've got what I think is a procedural question regarding the ordinance consistency, where it states that section 16.24.050 states that the planning commission shall approve, conditionally approve 49 lot line adjustment proposals at its next regularly scheduled meeting after receiving recommendations from the city engineer and planner. And we have not yet, is that this meeting then?
Yeah,
But we've not yet received recommendations from the city engineers.
no, because we just don't have the information. I think the expense to do the surveys and the title reports doesn't make sense to do that before lot line adjustment.
Is problematic in the context of that section that we don't have recommendations from the engineer yet?
I don't think so. I mean, they've reviewed, I mean, they've been involved in terms of, you know, our meetings with the Rancheria. They've been involved in the process.
So just to make sure it's clear in my mind, I think I understand exactly what's going on here, but there are still a lot of open issues, I think, to be resolved. And it's not clear to me that what's the break point before this has to come back to us for some sort of additional review. It's kind of a nebulous question, but it just seems to me that this might come back to us. I just don't know when and how, or should we look at this once we have all the information? Now,
I mean, if you want to review the final map, I mean, that would, you know, that's fine. I think, I mean, I don't know if this is more helpful. I think I didn't provide this because I didn't want to add confusion. I think it's shifted a little to the east. But this is a pretty accurate representation of the parcels on the ground. So I think, you know, it would be minor adjustments that would be needed based on the survey. So if you want to set a boundary, you know, if it ends up being more than 1,500 square feet. If you know, if the parcel area is changed. So you could put some limits on it if you want.
The only comment I'd add at this point, just is to echo, excuse me, what Richard said, is that there's a lot of variables that are up in the air with this. And I'm struggling with being okay with making decisions when it seems like we don't have all the ducks in a row, so to speak, that would support this and make this a much easier and clear cut decision. I guess that's kind of just my thought right now. Anything else from the commissioners? I can see we have representation from the Rancheria if they want an opportunity to speak at all. The public comment and come back if that works, or
Yeah, I mean, sort of going off what you two were saying. I mean, are we even positive that this section of the trail is on the Rancheria property?
There are markers out on the ground, so yeah, I think so. Because there are monuments. So, and that
You know, this record of survey in here, there shows I mean, there's a corner there at the north, but there's no one addition at the south end of that line. But so I guess this would be calculated this, but
because that parcel was surveyed as part of the city's stormwater project, make sure that the city's stormwater project is on that parcel. So I think, and like I said, the city engineer was part of our on-site meetings, and I know he has a pretty good idea of where that is.
yeah, on behalf of the Rancheria.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much. I have technical staff that has called in, and I'll say a couple of things, but I've got my surveyor who's called in, and he might be able to help with some of these questions. And also Leslie Sanders, our land use transportation director.
Excuse me, can you introduce yourself?
Pardon me?
Will you introduce yourself, please?
Okay, I'm sorry. My name is Jackie Hostler Parmesan. I'm the CEO for Trinidad Rancheria. I've been with the Rancheria since 2007. Been involved with all of the planning, permitting, and everything at the harbor. It's been done for the last 16 years. So this is one of the last projects to mitigate issues at the harbor. When we built the pier, the bait shop was directly on the pier almost. And so we got a permit to move part of it over where it is now, the little shack that you see. And it was always the intention to build the interpretive center, which would remove 3 of the little huts that are down there. We had no idea that the Lindo Trail right of way did a little L shape in one of those shacks. And for us, the easement would have been fine. It's the city attorney, as Trevor mentioned, was asking the lot line adjustment. The other issue that we have is we have time-sensitive funding for this project. We need to get a coastal development permit completed and approved by October of this year. So we're on a tight time frame. We don't have all the time in the world. This is all also gone to the city council previously, who had approved it in concept. And so coming to the planning commission, after all of the survey work and the work with the attorney and the Trevor, and there's been a lot of work involved. And it is a complex property, and I understand that. As far as the easements go, they are part of the documents the title Rancheria holds to the property. And the interpretive center will not encroach upon that easement to the pier. We have 100% agreement. We want the public to have access to everything there. That's part of the purchase agreement. So if we could ask specific questions, I believe Tony O'Rourke, he is a licensed surveyor. He met with Trevor and Eli and I and a representative from the city. Not sure what his name was. He was a surveyor. We agreed upon all of the points down there. So if you have really specific questions, Tony may or may not be able to answer them. I'm hoping he can. I would love to see this get approved tonight, so we do not lose our funding. Waiting until June is really going to be problematic for us. We're going to get that coastal development permit submitted sometime within the next several weeks. So if you would, consider all of the work that's gone into this, consider that it's the city attorney's request to change this. And it's very simple when you look at Lindo Trail and the little dog leg that goes behind one of the sheds. We're not closing anything. It's not a public walking path that's going to be closed. That direct access to the pier is going to remain in place. So can you re-ask those specific questions that the commissioners have? Yeah.
My only question that was specific, I guess, that Tony could reaffirm, that I guess it's just that we are sure that the trail is indeed on the Rancheria property, and that property line is correctly mapped, but it seems like it is.
The trail to the head, that trail?
Yes, the trail to the head.
Yes. Tony, are you with us?
Yes, I am. And I heard the question. So far as the location of the exhibit, it's based on record monuments based on the BLM retracement survey. and that trail does meander outside onto the rancheria for that short segment. So I am certain that area is off.
Any other questions that Tony can answer that would help you to move this forward?
I had one just about the piece of land underneath the interpretive center. And I recognize it's up on the hill, but I know we've talked about access to the pier, but also concerned about access to Launcher Beach as one of the few beach launch locations.
That will remain open, absolutely. There's our current project is a stormwater runoff project. There's permeable pavers that are there to allow that stormwater to infiltrate. That access to Launcher Beach will not be impacted 100%.
Questions for the applicant or staff, the commissioners?
I'll just make a comment. This has already been to the city council. I recognize that. And this is the agreement that we are working on. I guess my concern is that I just want to make sure that as we go through this process, which I understand, think the process, that there aren't some I gotchas. And I guess I would like to, I just would recommend that the project come back to us. I mean, it has to slow down, but when the survey is done, that maybe we would have an opportunity just to refresh ourselves and make certain we understand has happened. And if nothing else, that's a good way of documenting for the public all of this is going to transpire. And so I don't have any.
Could that be a condition of approval? Trevor mentioned doing it after the approval so that the funds.
Yeah, I'm not trying to slow down the project. I'm not trying to do that. I just think that from the public's standpoint, it would be very useful to have this documented so that we all see in one place the lot line adjustment and the new survey and any additional conditions that perhaps either the city engineer or the rancheria might have in this project. That's all I would like to see.
And what would that new survey show?
I would just like to make sure that we see all of these things, the easements and the lot line adjustments, and just to make sure that there aren't any issues. Again, I'm not suggesting that we slow down the project for that. I just think it would be useful to have that as a public record sometime in the future when put together in one package.
It's my understanding, and Trevor, please help me here, correct me if I'm wrong. It's my understanding that we can submit our coastal development permit. And it's a parallel process getting that lot line adjustment.
Yeah, I mean, I would think that, you could submit your CDP with just the city council's approval as the landowner. So that shouldn't stop you from submitting the CDP.
Okay.
I think the coastal commission would want to see the approval of the lot line adjustment before they act.
Right.
But yes, you could go ahead and submit, and I think we could do this as a condition of approval. I guess the catch is, well, if you've approved it and you come back and you don't like the map, then I think it's really more what you're asking for, Richard. It's just an informational item. So I think staff is going to work all this out in terms of figuring out the exact boundaries, and I think present that to you.
Yeah, I think, again, I'll try to do it a little bit more clearly. I just feel that it would be important to have this as I'll call it a public document, but part of a planning commission hearing, so that people who are interested in understanding what has changed and what is going on is all in one place, and they can see it. But the intent is, that would be the only intent.
So the current map that we paid for and had worked on is only missing that easement.
Well, I think it's, well, I mean, this trail hasn't been surveyed exactly where it is. I think,
Which trail, Trevor?
well, this, I think that these, and when I was talking to Tony, I mean, he planned on doing a survey to figure out exactly where things are to do the new legal descriptions. So I think it's really just seeing that final product.
Okay,
That would need to be completed anyway.
okay. So Tony, are you hearing that?
Yes, can I add a couple things to this? Just to provide some clarity on the exhibit that's being presented. So typically in the lot line adjustment process, there's a plot plan that's submitted, and usually we like to create it from either, field data or record data. In this instance, it was a combination of both. So the survey location, the survey monuments are located in the field. This map represents those locations. There may be some adjustment, very minor adjustments based on the actual field survey. And usually when it goes through the second phase of the engineering review process, that the surveyor or the engineer, the reviewer, will review that and make sure that those adjustments are not egregious, that they conform to that original map as submitted for approval. And if there's any kind of large adjustments and stuff like that, then that would kind of trigger that going back to review. That's why we've spent a little bit more time tacking this exhibit down on the ground to be sure that location reflects the actual location on the ground in the field. So does that help?
Yeah, I understand the process.
And will also the condition of approval that we're talking about, Bob, hallmark, right, easement, right, is really crux, right? So that'll get resolved.
Yes, we're talking about the easement that comes south out of Glendale Street for the walkway.
Okay. And just for my information, the plus minus, the 82, for example, over near the trail up to the head, is that a tolerance of accuracy, or are those the lengths of those segments, or what is that indicating on your survey?
Oh, okay, let me pull that up real quick, just a second.
The packet, it's packet page 12.
Those are areas?
Those are the areas?
Let me see. I'm not seeing what you guys are seeing.
So for example,
so,
if you look at the footprint of the proposed interpretive center building, right? You'll see those three numbers kind of orbiting around 37 plus minus, 74 plus minus, 64 plus minus. I was just wanting to understand what that.
Yes,
Is that
those are areas.
links?
Yeah, square feet. Square feet. Yes. Those are.
Those are the boundaries that help determine the square feet. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yes,
okay.
Correct.
The sides of the triangle. Okay, thank you.
Okay. You're kind of cutting out there, and I'm cutting out of my end too, so I apologize.
Hybrid's a wonderful thing. Any other questions for the applicant?
I just have a quick question for Tony. In your licensed interpretation, the description of the easement between the pier and Galindo Street as northerly and easterly, how would you interpret that?
I would refer to my attorney because that language is very ambiguous. You go northerly and easterly, and then connecting at an intersection point south of Glendale to the center of the pier. Okay, so basically that thing delineates a straight line, but really nobody walks that straight line, correct? And it doesn't really describe the width of that easement. It just describes kind of a general location. So it is ambiguous and it's hard to put on the ground. Nonetheless, it still does exist. So I think, that would be my response to that question.
Thanks.
Commission, before we open for public comment.
Yes. My question for you folks is whether in these conditions that you're contemplating adding, is there anything that isn't already sort of included in item number 2 regarding recommendations of the city engineer?
Is that a question for me?
Oh, no, sorry, Tony, it was not. It was for the other commissioners. Sorry.
Okay.
I would just say, for me, I think but if I heard Richard, what he's proposing, I like it, is that it would still come back. There would be a physical document presented in a public meeting again. And I don't see that in here necessarily due to the conditions, and it kind of goes off to the rest of the process. But by putting condition in that it would come back before us.
And that's no problem for us. If we can get conditional approval and you add that condition, that's no problem at all.
That's all I was asking.
Yeah.
And to address more succinctly your comment about conditions. Yeah, a lot of that's already included here. I'm just looking for an opportunity for the public to see the final outcome of all of this.
Yeah.
And maybe I'm being a little persnickety, but a lot of times when we do projects, approved projects, they get accomplished, and then people come back and say, well, whatever happened, or what's the final result, or is it done? I mean, even simple question like, is it done? So that's all I'm asking or requesting, if the commission feels that way. But
Our surveyor would be responsible to get the additional information. We would submit it to Trevor. It would come back to the planning commission for approval. As each of those items, you would have approval on anyway. So.
well, the lot line adjustment is what it is. This is just an opportunity for the public to see the final outcome of what we have done.
But my point though, Richard, is it's not any different. It's a condition of approval in that list that will be added, which we will satisfy.
Yes, if the commission agrees, yes.
Perfect. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks. Okay, this time we'll open it up for public comment.
Very good evening, commissioners, chairman, staff. West Kenny, 462 Ocean Avenue, Trinidad. I'm in favor of this project. At the last meeting, that it seemed like a fair trade. Of course, the question of the northeast, you stand in the center of the pier and look at the Glendale Street Trail. Basically where the easement runs, you look to the north and to the east and trail. I remember when Bob Hallmark built the trail ahead. Much more informal. The other side said, we'll go this way a little and this way, and backed it up. So, yeah. Parts.
Any other public comment? Jerry, please go ahead.
Is that for me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, sorry. It is difficult, and I'm sorry I didn't get to hear Mr. Kenny's comment. I just had a couple of questions again about process. One, this seems it's new change to the plan that was presented. And so it's new information for the Planning Commission to consider. My questions are, why did the attorney recommend a lot line adjustment versus just an easement? I think that's really important to ask because an easement is certainly still a good avenue, I think. So I'm wondering why he recommended a lot line adjustment, which the land then becomes part of Trinidad Rancheria and vice versa. And I think we want to be careful about that a little bit. If I was a commissioner, I would be careful about that. The second question I have is, I don't know which commissioner, I'm sorry, I didn't catch the name, had mentioned that in the policy it says they need to have the engineer's recommendation. And I think a proposal is being presented today without that recommendation. And I would caution that to happen for two reasons. You should have the full picture of this new information. Second, when you make an exception sometimes to a policy, it sets up precedents to make an exception again at some time. And you have to decide and have some good cause and reason when an exception is being approved. So that might be one thing you need to think about. Are you requesting an exception to a policy? And if I'm wrong in what I heard, please correct me. The third question I have is this, I'm assuming it's undeveloped land on both parts. And that makes it a little easier. And if there's no, if access with this lot line adjustment is going to be maintained, I would certainly make sure that that's in writing for your public access. Those were my comments at this time. I hope I was clear in coming through to you. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, thank you. I'm going to take the first one and leave the other two to Trevor. So Trevor and I and our city attorney, Russ Gans, and the city engineer, Steve Allen, had talked about this. And the reason that our attorney suggested to have the lot line adjustment instead of the easement is that he felt that the city would still have a liability if someone was injured there or whatever, like going in and out of the interpretive center. So he felt that it would be better for the city not to have that liability. That's what I'm going to try.
Yeah, I can answer the question about the procedural. One, the city engineer was involved in planning this lot line adjustment. So even though I don't have a formal recommendation, we all agreed out there on site and in staff meetings to this lot line adjustment. And you know, we still need the city engineer's approval. So that's one of the conditions of approval. So he has to review the final documents, make sure that they're all technically correct, meet the city's requirements. So there is a condition of approval to that the city engineer will review and approve the final documents before they're recorded. Let's see, and then undeveloped land, this is, the areas are actually developed. So the portion of Galindo is where sort of the oil response equipment is now down in the harbor. So it's that sort of grassy area where the bait shop, it's sort of the eastern portion of that grassy area where the bait shop is. And then on the other side, it includes the Trinidad Head Trail.
My last question, and I'm sure that it's a difficult one to think about for the Trinidad Rancheria. Has there been consideration to modify the square footage of the developed new center so that this lot line adjustment would not need to happen? And thank you so much.
We did discuss that at the hearing for the interpretive center and determined that it needed to be the size and location that it is.
But for clarification, again, that's only dealing with one side of the lot line adjustment. The other side of the Trinidad Head Trail, that is necessary. Correct? I mean, that then puts the trail onto city property.
Yeah, so then it has the benefit of correcting that, trail that the city maintains, that's not on city property. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
All right, any other public comment? All right, then we'll bring it back to the commissioners. Any other discussion, thoughts?
Just to respond to Sherry's comment regarding access down through there. I mean, I guess I can sympathize with her concern and wanting to preserve access to Launcher Beach and get that right. But I feel like this is not the time to include that in this project has already passed, I guess, is my sense. But that would come at the city council.
Just a question on the CEP process for the Rancheria. Your understanding, Trevor, and you're well versed, obviously, in CDPs and the coastal commissions. You don't see anything that would get in the way of them being able to apply based strictly off of the council's approval of the adjustment.
No, so the application would have to include a letter or something from the city council authorizing the Rancheria to apply for this project on city property, which I'm sure the Rancheria could get. So I think they could probably submit their CDP at any time, but I think it's cleaner to just have the lot line adjustment approved by the city. Because it's still, the coastal commission is still going to review the lot line adjustment themselves and these easements and things.
And I also appreciate the precedent setting was a note I had made, and I appreciate what you said about the engineer having been a part of this already, and that we're kind of lacking the formal report versus having this done in the absence of the engineer's awareness of what's going on and what the intent is.
Yeah, I guess if this were a private project that the city engineer wasn't involved in, I would have sent a referral and gotten, so we need, we'll need the title reports and the descriptions to review at the end. That's pretty standard. But then in this one, I didn't send a referral because he was part of the planning and decision on this lot line adjustment.
Okay, what is the pleasure of the commission?
I'm trying to put together some words for condition number 6. And almost. So something like this, if this makes sense, Trevor and commissioners. After receiving the updated survey and city engineering recommendations, the project is to be reported out in a future PC session for public reviews. Maybe I don't like the word. Maybe approved, but just
For the benefit of the public.
for the benefit, thank you very much, for the benefit of the public. Did you get that?
Yeah, we read those. So after receiving the updated survey and city engineer recommendations.
Project to be reported out in a future planning commission session for the benefit of the public.
Okay. Like to make a motion to go with it.
All right, so based on application materials, information, and findings included in the staff report and based on public testimony, I move to adopt the information and required findings as amended in the staff report and approve the lot line adjustment as submitted and as conditioned below.
With added conditions.
Didn't I say that?
With the amendment, yeah.
With amended conditions?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. All right, moving on to agenda item number 2, Trinidad 2023-05 CDP for 3 projects. We'll take a brief pause here for about.
Great, it's okay, like has out some materials that I'll be talking about.
Please, thanks, Bryce. All right, Trevor, staff report, please.
So this is a continuation to some degree of the item from last month where you authorized the temporary closures of the Parker Creek and Axel Lindgren trails that I had issued an emergency permit for in February. So we have, since that time, the management team has continued to meet with Coastal Commission staff, other agency representatives, and professional staff to discuss solutions, focusing on short-term solutions. So we've been meeting about weekly. We had another site visit, walking around down there with various representatives. And so this is the plan we have come up with. Again, it's a short-term solution to protect the sensitive areas down beach for the summer. So just as a quick summary, there's several elements of the project. Fencing at the top and bottom of the Axel Lindgren Memorial Trail. In terms of the temporary closure, the 6-month closure starting from the effective date of the permit would be, it would expire on November 9th. And we will be reporting monthly at the different meetings in terms of progress on what's happening with the trail repairs. The Ancestral Society has a grant from 7th Generation Fund to study the redesign of the trail particularly potentially rerouting the bottom of the trail so that it's less unstable. So that is ongoing. We expect that report in June, July at the latest. So we'll be looking at longer term solutions for the base of that trail. In the meantime, for this summer, for now, until the closure's lifted, the city's proposing fences at the top and bottom of the trail. So about where the barriers are now at the top, as well as another barrier at the bottom above, where it's at least eroded, so that people come down Parker Creek and then try and go back up that trail. The proposed fencing would be deer fencing. And that was chosen for a couple of reasons. One, you can see through it, so maybe the aesthetic impacts are a little less. And we're hoping that's less likely to be, people go around it, over it, or cut it. So that's why that was chosen. There will be signage placed at the top and bottom, redirecting people to either the Parker Creek Trail or the harbor area to access beaches. In addition, as part of their grant requirements, the Ancestral Society needs to place an acknowledgement for the grant. So we'll include that sign for this design review. That sign is 24 by 30. Will be a green background by lettering like the other trail signs, like the no collection signs. And the verbiage is there. Third, physical and visual barriers along to the bluff where the toe is exposed. Originally we were kind of looking at an area about 350 to 400 feet long. The willows and the vegetation has grown in quite a bit, so that whole area isn't necessarily so exposed anymore. But we also don't want to just fence off such a small area that it's going to bring attention to one area. So the exact length hasn't been determined yet, but probably somewhere in the 200 to 300 foot range is what we're looking at from around the base of the Axel Lindgren Trail and east. Part of the proposal includes placing jute netting, which is an erosion control matting, and placing that along the toe of the bluff and up the exposed areas, and then just out along the base to cover up any materials that might have sloughed off. And then I'll help keep more things from coming off and kind of cover those exposed areas. And then placing materials that are on the beach, rocks and driftwood, over the jute matting to hold it, make it look more natural. And then a fence as well, so like a wood slatted fence. We're looking at what's called sand fencing or snow fencing, more than 4 feet high. It'll be placed along that area, east west, and it'll be placed as high up on the beach as possible. You can sort of see it transitions from sand to rocks, and so right around that area is where it will be placed, which is about 10 to 15 feet from the base of the bluff, but well above maybe not well above the mean high tide line, but above the mean high tide line. And then for repairing the base of the Parker Creek Trail, and that's again using materials that are on the beach. So this is not a full repair. This is just piling rocks and other materials that are already on the beach to make the slope a little bit more gradual and safe for trail goers, since we're going to be directing people to use that trail. The city has already gotten two bids, one from Samara Restoration, one from Road Community Action Agency, to get some hand crews down there and do the work. And and the management team is going to be meeting again tomorrow to discuss those bids and hopefully get those guys scheduled as soon as possible. You know, the city plans on reopening the Parker Creek Trail. Regardless of what are done. Public works staff can do some of the work like the fencing on the Axel Road. Trail. There's to yeah, just you know, this is something we've met and we've talked a lot about. You know, the Coastal Commission is on board with it, which I think is saying quite a bit. They definitely have concerns about the trail closures. They want the Parker Creek Trail open as soon as possible. And they're willing to let the Axel Lindgren Trail be closed temporarily, but only temporarily. And I think, like other people have mentioned, there are some other trail closures, and the primary mandates is public access. So I think they're going to keep us on our toes with that. You know, it's a difficult location. It's a sensitive location. You know, we've brainstormed a lot of different options and had to reject, you know, other things for a variety of reasons. So I think this is, you know, it's the best compromise that everybody can agree on moving forward, protecting this area this summer. So I think it's, you know, it's a general consensus that this is our best option at this time. And you know, it is temporary. It will get the Parker Creek Trail reopened. It will protect sensitive areas. I think it can be found to be consistent with the zoning. City engineer is overseeing the design and putting together the materials. Couple of key points. One is it is in an area where policy 69 applies, so that does require approval of lineal descendants of Churi, which obviously they are in favor of this, but also the State Historic Preservation Officer and the Rancheria. So I sent out a letter. I'm working on those approvals. So it does require, the project requires use permit findings, again, because it's in an open space area, because it's new structures and grading, and there's no exemptions in space areas. The Parker Creek Trail repair is in special environments. That's a little bit different. So the rest of it is all in open space areas. Also design review because of these structures. So these findings are included in the staff report. The city engineer recommended the grading permit. So it's a coastal development permit, it's a use permit, it's a grading permit. So those are all the findings that are being included and made. As for conditions of approval, again, this is temporary. I included conditions that the fencing on the Axel Lindgren Trail will have to be removed within 2 weeks of the expiration of closure, whenever that is. So the planning commission could extend it beyond the November 9th, but that's where it stands now. The barrier along Old Home Beach will be checked at least every 2 weeks and within 24 hours after a high tide of 7.5 feet or more. There's about one of those a month, just to make sure that the material is staying in place and not getting washed away. And then the Yurok tribe has offered to provide cultural monitors during the work. The city will ensure that they are informed of project scheduling so that they can be on site during ground storage. So those are the conditions of approval. This doesn't include any additional trail closures. Those were approved last month. So this is what
Before we get, I just had a procedural question as we take bites out of this. Are we able to approve this in a more piecemeal fashion? Could we go location by location? just a question just to see if that's procedurally okay. I think that for me personally, that would help clarify the understanding and really kind of put some controls on some of this.
Yeah, you could approve portions of it and deny portions of it. You could, revise some of the things or change the conditions. But yeah, I think you could approve a portion and continue portion if you wanted to do that. Is that what you're asking?
More just, I'm just thinking in the future, because odds are this may come before us again, I guess. Parsing it out by location instead of all in one thing, because the overlap makes it more complicated, I think, than it needs to be. We could carve it up individually.
Yeah, I mean, and I suppose we could call it A, B, and C might be one way to divide it out, and then you can have separate motions for A, B, and C.
That's kind of,
Yeah.
okay. Okay. Commissioners.
I guess one thing I guess that I've found, it's not necessarily specific to this project, I guess, but thinking about the trail closure that we dealt with last month. I guess from a planning commissioner's perspective, I mean, this project, I feel like it's being presented to us, it's being presented as like some effort to improve public safety and improve bluff stability, but like I think it's quite obvious that that's not the actual intent of this, and so because it really is. And so I think it's difficult for commissioners, or I'll speak for myself, excuse me, it's difficult for me as a commissioner to weigh the situation, not knowing the complete picture. And I recognize that it has to do with these confidential archaeological resources that are potentially present at or near the site. And my experience working with confidential archaeological resources, the regulating body, I guess, if that's what we're going to call ourselves, is very familiar and has access to these confidential records so that they know whether or not the project that's being proposed is effective in preserving those records or those resources. And I guess as a commissioner, like, I'm not getting that information. And I find that frustrating. I recognize that's difficult in a public setting. And I mean, maybe one solution for that is to have like a closed planning commission meeting where we can actually discuss the real issues here. But obviously that's also very unpopular with the public. So I don't even know if there's an avenue for that in the coastal planning process. Like, is this a systemic issue, or do we have another avenue to like maybe properly address this? Because reflecting upon the meeting last month, like public and the planning commission, or excuse me, the public and myself as a planning commissioner had been led to believe that these trail closures were for public safety and bluff stability, but like that's not the case, and I find that frustrating.
I understand that. I think Bryce Kenny said at the last meeting that, I mean, we all know that it's a sensitive cultural site, and it's not about protecting necessarily a specific resource. It's resources that are potentially exposed. And that's why it's kind of general at this point. And it's really to keep people away from it.
Okay, so actually, the items that you mentioned, it's a combination of all. Okay, so first of all, the Axel Lindgren Memorial Trail, that the steps and so on, there's a lot of areas where it is awkward going down, and then of course way at the bottom, currently unsafe the way it is. But at the same time, that is in the 1.5 acre study area. And as a result, a grant was obtained, as Trevor was saying, from the 7th generation. In addition, they were able to obtain some money from the Coastal Conservancy so that this way they can reroute the base of the trail, the toe of the trail, so that it would be safer. And like I said, the steps, I mean, I've gone down it several times recently just because I was going down there to inspect the beach area and see how it looked with other people that were from staff, and meaning like engineers, our city engineer, city planner, geologists, and so on. So that's that one. Now the Parker Creek Trail, it's fine until you get to the base. And the base of it, I wouldn't really say it's unsafe, but it is dangerous because it is muddy, it's rocky, and it's easy to slip there. I know with both of those trails, when I'm going back up, I'm actually, holding on to whatever rock or whatever, just to make sure that I don't lose my balance. Personally, I don't like to end up laying into the pile of, But anyway, so what's going to be happening there is that there's a huge log way at the base of the Parker Creek Trail. So it was suggested that if that log was removed, that the trail could be safely, gradually taken down and where that log is. So that instead of where the rocks and the mud and stuff currently are, people would be gradually going down where that log is and then safely getting to the beach. Also, part of the problem with the Parker Creek is because of the Axel. So in other words, we want to get beach access, but if we say, okay, this trail is closed, use that trail. So if we're directing people to Parker Creek, we want to make sure that we're not directing people where they end up getting injured and then saying, you told us to go there and we got injured. So we want to make it as safe as possible. The other part of it is on the beach itself. So as Trevor was saying, so putting the jute netting on top of the area that has erosion, and then also adding fence right by there to keep people from about 300 feet. An area, so it's about 300 feet long, but right up towards the bluff. Certainly, if kids went there and played around there, it's possible where someone could get injured because you never know how unstable it is, because it clearly is. And I'm hesitant about what Trevor was saying. Putting rocks or whatever, it's probably going to end up being towards the bottom of it because it's pretty vertical, and it's hard to put rocks on something that's vertical. So anyway, like I said, it's really a combination of all of them. I wouldn't single anything out. Now, yes, the Churai study area is down there, and that's why it is even called Old Home Beach, because that used to be their old home, that area. So also from a city standpoint, we don't want to have, number one, people getting injured anyway, but also number two, have disturbance of any cultural resources. It's not good for us. And that's why it was suggested in there. And I just came up with the idea with the game cameras, but that's something that's just a thought. But in other words, if someone is there where they shouldn't be, then, clearly we want to be able to find out, okay, what was going on. So hopefully everything will work out well. But I'm looking at it from the standpoint that We want to have access to the beach open by Memorial Day. We want to direct people from Axel Lindgren Trail to Parker Creek Trail. We want to make sure that the Parker Creek Trail, the toe of it especially, is as safe as possible. It really is going to be a lot better access than it currently is. And this way, it's best for everybody. I mean, whether people talk about liability or not, we just don't want to see anybody get injured in any way. So it is a possible problem. If someone does get injured, then they complain, and people are sue happy, even though there may be some law that might protect us, but ultimately people do file lawsuits, and then it's up to the court as to what happens and so on. But I just want you to know that we're looking at it in a global way. The other part of it is that we're having these Churai management team meetings, which are composed of the city, of the Churai Ancestral Society, of the Yurok Tribe, of the California Coastal Conservancy. We've also added the California Coastal Commission. And then we have our city engineer, our city planner, and myself, and our grants people present. So basically, it's been hard trying to, move this whole group. This is basically what Trevor is indicating is we're finding areas of consensus. And this is a way to open the beach, and it's, to have the beach accessible and to have a trail that would safely get people up and down to the beach. So again, I'm looking at it globally, in that sense, rather than just focusing on one thing or another, because it is a combination of things. And in order to, number one, get it done by Memorial Day, and have the beach open and accessible by a trail. And I just wanted to make sure that, you understood that. So, okay. Anything else that you guys have while we hear? If you like.
Yeah, I mean, I understand what you're saying, Eli. I guess my only sentiment in response to that is that the safety is, the Parker Creek Trail, I've been down there a few times since it's been closed. And we all know that when you walk on the trail, you take some risk. And I understand what you're saying about people being sue happy. Absolutely, people are. And even if we're in the right, it's a major headache for the city. But I guess in this case, the Parker Creek Trail is that and safe. However, I'm all for improving and maintaining the trail. Absolutely. And making it as safe as possible is a great thing, but I didn't, in my opinion, didn't think that it was so unsafe that it worked close. Yes.
I do have, I hope it's a quick question about the updates on progress to date. Is that just that there's been decisions made about opening dates and materials to be used? Or are there other updates to share with us as well?
Yeah, I think primarily this, narrowing down this plan. So like I said, we've met weekly since the last meeting. We started throwing out some ideas and putting together a plan, did a site visit to kind of refine that plan. And then at the last meeting, sort of it's not a voting body. We don't vote, but it's, no one had any objections to this proposal. Everybody was, in favor of moving forward with it. So that's the update in terms of that. These last meetings, since our last planning commission meeting, have really focused on this sort of short-term solution. We haven't beyond that at this point. Like I said, the city engineer kind of developed a little bit more of a formal written description, a list of materials, and then city manager got quotes for the work from two firms. We'll be meeting again tomorrow and deciding on which one of those to move forward with, probably whichever one can schedule it the soonest. Would be my assumption. And then, so that's really what that's been focused on. And then, you know, just wanted to, but also, you know, the Ancestral Society with their grant has formally contracted with GHD to do the study of the base of the trail. So they are actively working on that. We haven't discussed specifics at, you know, our meetings in the last month. But they do expect a report is scheduled to come out in June. You know, let's say July. So we are expecting to get that. That about covers what we.
In those discussions, is there any proposed timeline for reopening the Axel Lindgren Trail?
No, we have not talked about that. You know, I think, you know, the rerouting of the base is probably a longer term exercise potentially in terms of doing the studies and the permitting and the environmental review to do something like that. So I think it would be worth discussing possible shorter term solutions with the existing alignment. We haven't talked about that yet, but I think it would be worth our meetings.
Richard.
Well, first of all, I'll start with an editorial comment. One of the things that has been disturbing to me has been the lack of any action on management, jury management area. That was approved in 2007, that management plan. And 10 years later, we are still almost in the same position. But I really feel that the progress that's been made in the last couple of very good, and I'm actually kind of optimistic that maybe we'll get some things done. So that's one reason why I feel pretty good about the way in which the team is working. I just had a couple of simple questions, I think. One is, it's my understanding, I think you just clarified this, I hadn't heard this before, but the grant that TAS has is the money, or that the grant is going to GHD. Now, is that just for the study to propose options for rerouting?
I believe so, yeah, and recommendations. Yeah.
So as much as I like the progress that's going on right now, if you really think about it, that trail's not going to be open until next year at the very earliest, because we have several months for the investigation and options, and that puts us close to the fall. No one's going to want to do any work in the wintertime. So, you know, I just don't think that that trail is going to be open for some time. Now, we are going to look at it though in November. Is that correct?
Yeah, so your approval for the temporary closure from April would expire on November 9th. So, you know, we would, depending on what happens in the next few months, you know, we might propose extending that closure. It did include a clause that you could extend it for good cause if progress can be shown to be made. But yeah, like I said, I think it would be worth exploring shorter term options for that as well.
I can add a little bit to that.
First of all, the seventh generation grant, I'm not sure the exact amount, but my impression is that it's simply being used to help pay for the GHD to do the report. Not that that's all that's going to be done with the grant. So my feeling is that other, improvements will be done with the grant. It's just that the funding for GHD's report is going to come from the.
Well, okay, I get that, but the wording that we have is that this is a grant for restoration options. And I read options as not necessarily boots on the ground doing work. So that's my concern.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to mention is, and Trevor will say 100%, what you did last month was basically set the 2 months and the 6 months. So naturally it has to be revisited by November 9th, but once the report is done, possibly June to July, it could be scheduled at a prior meeting, before waiting till November, to show you what the progress is and what some of the options are and make a timeline. But I agree with you, Richard. My feeling is that, any improvement would be done next year. And my goal is to have the trail open, ideally, just like this one is, if possible, by Memorial Day. So in other words, in a year, I think that we should have those improvements and have it open. If it happens sooner, that's fine. But ideally, I think it shouldn't go more than a year. And if it needs to be rerouted, then if that can be done within a year, fine. Otherwise, like Trevor said, in the short term, if there is a possible way to reopen it and there's agreement to reopen it, and do the temporary fix at the bottom as the trail exists now, that's possible. But it does go through the dry study area, and therefore we do need to get buy-in because it is in that area. We certainly don't want people deviating from that trail, and partly when there is work being done. Now, as Richard had indicated, like one of the things that was suggested before is to have railing. So ideally, we can get railing that put in during this period, hopefully within the year. And the other thing, like I said, the steps, the steps are quite worn down, and we need to get some new steps for the most part there to make it safe. Because right now, it's easy to trip. I'm not saying that people, like when I would be walking down there, it's possible to trip if I'm not really paying attention. And there is at least one or two spots where it's holding the wood is actually like some metal bar, and that's exposed where people can easily get their foot caught in that metal, and trip. But you really have to be pretty much paying attention. Navigating the trail, if you're paying attention until you get to the base of it, it's fine as far as, being navigable, but you got to be paying attention, and not sort of like, I'll stop and take some photos, but sometimes people still looking at their phone when they're walking, even crossing streets. And as a result, accidents could happen. But I think the overall improvement of redirecting the base of the trail, of adding the railing, and of replacing the wooden steps, I think that those three things would really enhance the trail.
Oh, no, just to add, we did talk about, could we leave the Axel Lindgren Trail partially open? Because it's really just the base. And, we decided that wasn't a good option because people get, all the way down there and then it's closed and then they're going to go off the trail to find another, because they don't want to go back. We thought that was too big of a risk to leave the trail partially. We did talk.
Anything else, Richard?
I was just curious, you sent a letter to the State Historic Preservation Officer. Have you received any comments back from them at this point?
No,
Or do you see any problems with?
I wouldn't expect any issues from them. They don't usually comment. I just said that, you know, we're trying to expedite this and get it done by Memorial Weekend. And I said, if I don't hear from you by, I think this Friday, the 19th, I'll assume you have no objections.
And if it's necessary, I kind of concur with what you said about maybe parsing this out. If there's anything that we can do to keep the Parker Creek Trail progress on track, that would be really good, if not to get it done sooner. And so as we go through this, if there's things that we need to parse out, I'm willing to do that. May or may not be a need. Something I have right now.
A few tabs on the document, sorry. First, just disclosing some ex parte communication. A couple members of the community have approached me about this agenda item. One frustration, just to share, that was voiced is that the notice of the meeting was posted. And in that notice, it states that the documents are available, but they're not available until later. So maybe just tightening up that language to make sure that's what posted doesn't send somebody looking for a document that doesn't exist. And they were offering opinions on primarily the game camera presence. A few editorial comments, and then I'll get into kind of the meat. One, I apologize. I was not present at last month's meeting. That was the day of my surgery, and I regret that I was not present. I truly do, because it's a very important issue to me. And I really, really wished I'd been there for that. An observation just in the document itself, right? Parker Creek was closed for safety, and I appreciate liability concerns. I will offer the opinion that if the city's in the business of operating trails, they're in the business of assuming liability. There's a lot of trails around this community and state and county area that are in similar or worse conditions. And that liability is just assumed, and people have that. Again, that's just an opinion. This document speaks to Parker Creek being closed, but then also speaks to the fact that it will be reopened regardless of whether or not the work is done. And I just see a total disconnect between those statements in the document. And I just do not comprehend that position by the city or the team.
I just wanted to note, ideally to try to address something like that. I guess the proper wording would have been that Parker Creek would be open even if everything that we're planning is not complete. So in other words,
That was the point I was making exactly.
yeah. So what I'm saying is that in our meetings, we're having set the goal to open it by Memorial Day, to have access to the beach open by then, and to have some work done. In other words, the implication was we don't have to have everything done. Possibly the fencing down along the beach, if that's not in, that it's possible to be open. I did already purchase the fence, and both the companies that had placed the bid or proposal have indicated that they can do it within a few days. So I'm really optimistic. But the bottom line, which was good, was the fact that coming out of that meeting, there was consensus that number one, have access to the beach. Number two, have Parker Creek open. And number three, not to burden it that, okay, everything's not done, we can't open. So we were encouraged that we were given that opportunity to make as much improvements as we can, but not to necessarily have opening Parker Creek held up by it's not finished, we're not going to open.
May I piggyback a question?
Sure.
Concern? Could you describe the scope of activities that might be covered by this potential additional emergency CDP? Allow things to get completed before Memorial Day?
Yeah, it's a little convoluted. It's actually Coastal Commission staff are the ones who suggested it. Because again, they want work done and get Parker Creek Trail open by Memorial Weekend. So because this appeal period, even if you approve everything tonight, the appeal period is going to run faster. Okay, so if we can get a crew done, if that means I have to issue an emergency permit, I can do that, but it has to be the minimum necessary to mitigate emergency. So I think, what we were talking about is the, in particular, the Jeep matting would be one of the primary things. I think the fencing on Axel Lindgren Trail could go in. The repairs at the base of Parker Creek Trail, that maybe isn't critical, and then certainly the fencing along the beach. So the fencing on Axel Lindgren Memorial Trail, the jute matting, and if we can get the work on the base of Parker Creek.
All right. In the staff report, you mentioned that signs will be placed on both fences indicating trail is closed, directing people to alternate beach access. I assume that's presuming that there is alternate beach access, which there currently is not.
Well, so it'd be directing people to either Parker Creek Trail or the harbor area for beach access.
So more just not specific access to Old Home Beach, but just how to get to a beach.
Yeah, but Parker Creek Trail would be access.
Theoretically, right?
Yes.
Just an observation in the staff report, you mentioned the concept or the possibility of other readily available fencing due to time and weight constraints. I assume that's the snow fencing. Eli, is that the fencing you've purchased or ordered as the snow fencing? And is that wood slat? Because in the actual design review criteria, it states that it will be wood.
Yeah, it is wood.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. I had a question to help me understand about the fencing jute monitoring. This is on packet page 19, but we talk about the fencing will be removed prior to the first winter storms, after Labor Day weekend, and before the end of September. Am I understanding that basically that's saying after Labor Day weekend, no later than the end of September? Is that what that's supposed to mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
And we discussed whether the jute matting should be removed, and we're going to get jute matting that does not have plastic or foreign materials in it, and so that's going to stay because plants will grow up through it during the summer, so we don't want to have to.
That point already. Was there the jute matting, the stuff that will get in place but won't necessarily be captured by vegetation down at the base, right? There's going to be potentially a little bit. Is that correct or no?
Yeah, so the idea is, it's pretty steep in areas. It's usually the U-pin, like kind of staples that are used to pin that down. So do that as well as we can on the steeper areas. Then it will come out few feet into the rocky area at the base of the slope, because some materials have come down and so cover materials.
It's just a thought on that. Is there any risk of that eroding and getting into the harbor and then becoming entangled? Has it for boats? Anything else? I saw that you said this engineer had that concern.
Well, yeah, that's been a major concern that we've talked about in terms of bringing foreign materials. So that's why we're really just trying to stick to materials that are already on the beach. I think the jute matting is not seen as, it deteriorates pretty quickly. I don't think it, the Coastal Commission certainly was worried about entanglement hazards with different kinds of ropes and fences. And that they didn't seem to be worried about that. So I'm not necessarily a technical expert. Not a concern with the Jeep.
And then I will just say, I also have a great deal of concern over the game cameras. That's a big sticking point for me personally. There's no guidance as to anything about how it would be used, who would view it, that kind of stuff. And I'm not ready to set up, and I understand the purpose, I understand the sensitivity, I understand the intent behind it, but just for me, that's a big stopping point, as this is presented tonight. I'll stop there.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that other than the fact that cameras were mentioned at the meeting, but and nobody has said so far, yes, let's get that. So on the list that our city engineer prepared, that was not on the list.
Well, except that
But I see your point that, by having it included in here, that's
right, the option is included in here as presented, so it did make it a little further than just discussion, I'd say.
yeah. And actually what Trevor was trying to capture, because I think in a prior one, she had mentioned about like plants, but that's been turned down at the meeting, but she was trying to keep it like broad so that it wouldn't once you do the at least for the prior meeting, when you do the 2 month and the 6 month, you want to have it a little bit broad so that we wouldn't have to come back for it to you every single point of saying, oh, we want to add the plants or we want to add the cameras. But there really hasn't been any consensus about the cameras so far.
Anything else from any commissioners or staff before we open it up to public comment, if I haven't completely lost track of it?
Yeah, I've got, I guess a new point, which is that if that jute matting is not to be removed after summer, which I think it says it will at various points in the staff report, but it's not really a temporary project, right?
Well, except that it deteriorates pretty.
So do all of us.
Yeah.
Anything like that is the 1 year is gone.
Again, I'm not, I don't know the technical specs, but yeah, my understanding is that it degrades pretty quickly over time.
Just another question for clarification. So there's really going to be, I want to make sure I understand these fences. There's going to be a metal type fence, which will be at the top of the bluff and at the bottom of the trail. And then in addition to that, there will be the so-called snow fence or sand fence, which will be on the beach side of those other fences.
That's correct. So top and bottom of the Axel Lindgren Trail, extending into the vegetation on either side. So you can, that is proposed to be deer fencing where you can see through it. It blends into the environment and keeps people out, and the fencing on the beach, with slats.
So I don't recall from last meeting or last month's meeting, or maybe it's embedded in here and I don't see it, but I mean, those metal fences have got to be anchored somehow. And so that to me is a big deal in terms of development and potential disturbing of cultural resources.
So yeah, so they would be metal, like 6 or 8 foot metal stakes pounded into the ground. So, again, we did talk about other fencing options. And this one sort of presents the least amount of disturbance. The TAS are in support of it.
Well, that's the only thing that's keeping me on track here is the understanding that there are multiple organizations which have that are working together. So that's, yeah, okay. All right. Thank you.
All right, at this point, I'll open up to public comment. Bryce, did you have any?
Well, I think it's the first year. Yeah. All right, I'm used to it. But I would ask them if I could consider a couple of minutes of rebuttal so I can speak again after, because I'm sure other public comment as well. Different things to say about what I said. Yeah, I'm speaking in opposition to the project, at least to the extent that it wants to do an open-ended closure of the trail and the rest of it. So they're very anxious to see Parker Creek repaired and back in service. So wooden fence along the beach, with that, reduce area is fine, but I do feel strongly about the aspects. Line for you here, and I think the first point is the most important one as far as the ability of this project to guard municipal codes. So at page 7 of the staff report, it mentions section 17.20.80, but it forgot to mention, it was inadvertent, that that only allows for fences on the top of the bluff, not at the bottom. So this pertains to both the wooden fence and the metal fence. I got to read copy here if anybody wants to see it. 17.20.080B. Fences of non-view obscuring type along off top. Reasonably necessary to deter trespassing or to discourage indiscriminate transfers upon the bluff face. So it's very important that we, be accurate about these things. That's a big point here. Also, the code in that previous one talks about the special environments of the creek trail. 17.60.080 is the open space zone. That allows for fences, but only around the burial ground. Study zone down. And the burial ground can't be close to the actual end of the trail, or they wouldn't have put the trail in. Fence, it's very limited what fences where you can put fences. Study area. General plan and the zoning ordinances, like the staff report says, protect views from vistas. And that's what the old Memorial Lighthouse site is. Now, they call it a park, but that's a private vista, private property, but it's treated like public property. Everyone uses it. They enjoy the view from up there. And they put a big metal fence right there with big signs on it. It's not a good idea. It's not aesthetically acceptable. And I understand that you can see through it, and you can see through the beach fencing also, especially on page 30 with the slats further apart. I think it's much more suitable. It's going to be fencing. But and also the metal posts and everything, it just sounds more like a permanent fence. I mean, wooden fence, that's a temporary. Just a concept of temporary. The Van Wyck Trail closure was technically temporary also, but it's going on 4 years, and so it would take a lot of comfort in this idea that it's just going to be temporary. Like Richard said, when you're pounding metal posts, you've got to pound them down into the ground sufficiently if you're going to have a 5 foot tall fence. And what if you hit some cultural resources during that process? Sounds like a good idea. And if there's going to be signs on the fences at the top there, they should be no bigger than 18 by 22. it almost sounds like they want the big metal posts so they can put up a big sign taking credit for having funded this project and, oh, and here's our website, you can go here. That's not the idea. It's supposed to be. And if the bottom of Parker Creek can be temporarily repaired easily, why can't the bottom of Axel Linger be repaired easily also? Point is, it could be 1 day's work, a little bit of shovel work, carve out some more steps, maybe put in a couple of grid with portions, or we call it the cable steps. The problem, it can be right back in service and just as safe as any trail around here. There just haven't been any good justification why the trail has to be closed. There's a lot of visitors to Trinidad that will not be able to go to that beach if actually your trail is closed for like a year or so, like it will be. They won't be able to find their way to Parker Creek or Wagner Street Trail. They go there, they'll say, well, like somebody's yard, I can't go down here. And, you know, that'd just be a shame for no reason, no good reason. That's very disturbing. So I think as it's written in the totality, it's this very vulnerable to appeal to the city council. I don't want to appeal it. I'd rather not have to. But you know, we'll have to see what takes out here. I put some language there. You guys might want to use it as a starting point to if you want to put conditions on it. Yeah. You guys have the authority. This other management team, they have no authority in the city. I understand Coastal Commission staff members are part of the team. It's the Coastal Commission has authority, just like you have authority. Staff members have authority. They can they recommend to the commission, just like our staff recommends to you, but you guys have the authority here. And another thing that's troubling about this is that here the city is positioned to start dumping all this money into the project, and we're trying to give the property away. And the recipients are saying, well, why don't you put a railing in here and do this and do that, and then we'll take it for free later after you fix it all up. You know, is that right? No, that doesn't sound right to me. We need to get the transfer of the property done. Some tribe I know will accept this property. And I understand there's litigation pending that might be connected in some way to that issue, but I don't think if the city finished the transfer of title, that would actually simplify the litigation. Because the city started the case by suing TAS, because every time the city would try to move the transfer forward, they would block it and interfere and say, no, we won't agree to that. Finally, after what, it's been 16 years, they threw up its hand and said, well, we got to have a judge then tell us who's supposed to do what under this agreement. How do we end this stalemate? So transfer was completed. I think that would simplify and maybe even completely eliminate that.
And Bryce, if you could work on wrapping it up.
Yeah, one more point. The final point is that the management team meetings are illegal. This business has to be done in public, where people can see it. Very limited exceptions. I don't know how this got started, but this is really messed up situation with these secret meetings that are allocating, oh, we're going to spend this money, we're going to do that. This is really unacceptable. If you guys have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Otherwise, I'll for your time.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Jerry, I see you're still with us on the screen there.
Thank you. As a person who grew up in Trinidad and of the Yurok descendancy, I'm disappointed in the comment by Mr. Kenny, and I really do respect him as a person who's lived in Trinidad for a long time. But this is a traditional village, and I do know that there is some room for improvement in relationship. And I think it was Mr. Johnson who said earlier he was happy to see some movement happening. And I think that we need to take that positive step forward and see that movement is happening regarding this trail and relationship, hopefully, with this committee working with the Coastal Commission and the city and trying to move forward. I hear you. I'm a resident of Trinidad. We love the beaches. That's why we live here. We love to be able to have access to these trails. But we also have a responsibility. And you took that responsibility as planners to protect all areas within the city limits. And those areas do come with traditional sites. And I do hope that you approve the plan that it was presented. It's a good plan that'll move forward with small steps at a time, opening Parker Creek as planned, developing this trail with a long-term goal of getting it stable. And I thank you for your time, for listening to my perspective as a member of the Yurok tribe, and who also has a village, not this village, but how we have the responsibility, not only as community members, as city leaders, but myself as a traditional person, to figure out how we can move forward in a good way, balanced way, for everybody involved. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comment? Please.
It takes some nerve to be up there and comment to you guys. My name is Jim Papano, and I live up the Earth State Park. So I'm an Arizona, and I love to go down this trail soon. I retired from Redwood National Park. I lived in the Salt Lands. And I just wanted to suggest the possibility in the park during the winter time, crews take out the bridges over Redwood Creek because it's been flood. The coastal erosion that took out the base of the Pennsylvania Trail and other places that you can see on other beaches, leave a scar maybe 20 or 30 feet high. And it's a big scale process. And the process put in all of sea stacks out there in the ocean and all that stuff. And if you try to compare it with jigs and all that kind of stuff, I think it's gonna be too small. But like I was saying with the national park, what they did is that the bridges in the summertime, it's strong, and then floods to check them out. And I think you could get a ladder, maybe a light aluminum ladder or something. That's, you could make a strong.
Trevor, did you have any comments, or can you speak at all to code sections of the plan?
Yeah, so just the 1760, it's actually 16, is that one. So that one says, except for a fence around the burial grounds, and any structures without approval of the city, lineal descendants of Trinidad, and SHIPA. So basically, it's a reiteration of policy 69. The one, the 20.0, yes, let's see. So it does say, so no structure shall be placed on or extended beyond the face of the bluff, and no stone or shaft shall be sunk into the bluff face, except the following structures may be placed on the bluff face, and alterations made thereto subject to obtaining use. So stairways, ramps, and other structures or devices designed and intended to provide public access from the top of the bluff to the beach. Fences of a non-obscuring type along the bluff top. And shoreline protection structures. So, I mean, Bryce has a point there. I don't think the intent, I think this fence is really more, it's not for public access, but it's about public access and safety on an access point. So it might be more of a structure related to public access, being temporary to block public access and safety. I mean, I really think that, that there should be a fence at the bottom there, because if people come down Parker Creek and there's no fence or signage, they're gonna try and scramble up that. And it's not a significant source of erosion, it's just additional erosion and damage. Scramble up, and then they get to a barrier at the top that they can't get by. And then they're gonna go around bushwhacking. So I think it's important to have a barrier on.
Okay, now you've confused me. I was under the impression that there would be a fence at the top of Parker Creek Trail.
The Axel Lindgren.
Well,
Sorry,
you were talking about Parker.
No, sorry,
Okay,
no,
okay,
Axel
good.
Lindgren,
Okay,
sorry.
I'm not confused.
No fences at all on Parker Creek, if I said Parker Creek.
All right.
With that, then I will bring it back to the commission for additional discussion. I did just want to check in with everybody, see is everybody good to push through? Does anybody need a quick break before we dive into this, or?
Oh, okay, so I'll address the issue of illegal meetings. These team meetings have been going for years in one form or another. So what's the rationale for saying that we are not violating the public trust?
Well, that's about my pay grade.
Yeah, so our city attorney, Russ Gans, has indicated that when we do have the shoreline management team meetings, if they are not talking about cultural resources, that they should be open. So that's what we have done. Since he had brought that forward to us, we've only had one meeting that was open, and then we've had these series of meetings that have been closed because of the fact that cultural resources, the trails, and the beach area.
So it's clear, the justification is that these team meetings have been addressing cultural resources, as well as fixes and solutions for trail opening. Okay.
Yeah, and I'm very sensitive to that because I don't want to follow where, I really believe in the sunshine law and the fact of having open meetings. So as a result, I will keep pressing that we don't have something on the agenda that's going to be focused on cultural resources, that the meeting should be open. And unfortunately, along with that, anytime that we have a meeting that's open like that, then we couldn't have, yeah. So in other words, when I say fortunate, okay. So in other words, if the meeting is open, then for the Churai management team, we can actually have 1 or 2 council members present, but only if it is open. So we're not talking about cultural resources, which allows it to be closed. Then the meeting will be open, and we can also have council members. Right now, we cannot have council members because it is closed. We can only have staff.
And I assume then that that would be open to the public as well, as well as to.
Just a clarifying question. When there are cultural resources on the agenda, does this meeting, or could it be structured in such a fashion similar to a council meeting where there's closed session and open session? So
technically it can. It's just that I might suggest,
that, and then also kind of the same point that I made at the beginning. Maybe perhaps parsing this instead of just wrapping this up into one big parcel, right? Discussing these things individually might provide opportunity, at least for input and some sunshine and some light to be on it. Then, of course, can go into closed session to discuss, because I also understand that a lot of these things are intertied and are seem to interconnect, and nothing, it's very hard for them to be in isolation, but it might be a way to increase transparency moving forward as a suggestion for this.
Exactly. Whenever we can. Ideally, we'll have meetings, that can be totally open, because I hate to have council members show up and then all of a sudden, they have to leave after 15 minutes or whatever, because the rest of it is closed. So ideally, we can have meetings that are open, council members, and have weigh in also.
And then just another clarifying question. Since you mentioned staffs there, and I heard you say the grant staff is there, does the city have active grants for the study area? I'm just curious about their inclusion.
Yeah, their inclusion is because we're identifying potential grant opportunities. And, and then, also because we're talking about trails too. And we like to get some more funding for grants, from grants for trails if possible, as needed. And the other part of it is erosion and the bluff, because we had a meeting today, and we're going to have an open meeting in June 14th and 15th, which is open to the public, on the coastal resilience action plan. And that's where we'll be talking about sea level rise and coastal erosion and everything. And that's based upon a grant that's about $500,000 to study all of this. But then we're going to need grant funding to help address sea level rise and coastal erosion. So those are all interrelated, and that's why, having grant people there present, and then of course our city planner and our city engineer.
Mr. Chairman, I could just have a minute since.
A minute.
I brought up the issue of the meetings.
I will just, you can have your minute, but the legality of the meeting is, I think, well past the purview of the planning commission. So with that said, you can certainly have your minute.
Okay, and I'm pleased to hear that, they are now open to the public. You going to attend the arts meeting, not a member of the public.
We're talking about cultural resources. Never talking about cultural resources.
Okay, we'll talk about that. But I'm surprised that you guys forgot about the policy that the city worked on so hard a year and a half ago or so, which I put a lot of input in work. We balance the need for protecting cultural resources with also respecting the open meeting laws and health. What we came up with was the rule that, yes, see, the whole place is a cultural resource, whole study area. So that can't be the touchstone. It has to be something like, okay, it's the location of the graves. Obviously, that is something that needs to be kept confidential. Maybe what a dance club was or something like that. So what we came up with was that in government to government meetings between the city and tribes, which the management team is one tribe, and state agencies, which are governments, if specifics about cultural resources have to be identified, they're done in writing only. And the members of the committee can see those papers. They can't read them out loud so that they become public. And those papers sent from the public record back. Nobody can come in and say, I have one copy of those papers. Those are exempt by California law. So that's the balance we struck. And the management team meeting is a standing advisory committee under the Brown Act, required to be open to the public. And it's also government to government meetings. So it's the perfect opportunity to put the city's new policy into effect. And I'm in a loss as to understand why that's not happening.
Thank you. So how would we like to proceed? Do we want to carve this up into little pieces? Does that seem like a good plan?
That's what I think we should do.
Okay, I would like that too. I did have a question, Trevor. I didn't see an example of the deer fencing in the packet unless I missed it. The suggestion for, you know, a different type of fencing, the sand or snow fencing there. I understand obviously it's not as robust, but it balances, I think, potentially. I'm intrigued by the suggestion.
I think the deer fencing was proposed, again, because you can see through it. So it was felt that had less visual impact. But I think if you feel that, the sand fencing would be better aesthetically, I don't see an issue with that. I mean, 4 feet, I think it'd still be, like one of the things we talked about was like split rail fence, but then to install something like that in the ground. So I think the driving the stakes in the ground is the least amount of soil disturbance, unless you're just going to set something on the ground, and that can be too easily. So I think the metal posts and the snow fencing could be installed with the metal posts. At 4 feet high, I suppose someone would scramble over it a little easier.
Not that easily.
And as far as the location at the top of the trail, I just want to clarify, because it's a big area. There's a spot where the lighthouse was. There's kind of memorial. Are we talking kind of where the plateau, the opening, in essence, where the trail truly begins, the narrow section there? Is that?
Yeah, I think it'd be a narrow section. It's pretty close. I understand where the barriers are now. It's been a while since I walked by those. But yeah, so the idea would be to extend it into the vegetation on either side. So we want it in an area that's fairly narrow.
It's been a while since I've been down that trail as well, but isn't there sort of a landing, several steps below the top of the trail?
It's about halfway.
It's half inch.
Bench, yeah.
There's a couple of benches as you head in on the right one. I think.
We did, like I said, we did talk about the potential for blocking it, there as a vista point. But I think, that bench has been an issue because people stop there and they go off trail there. And so we didn't want to encourage more off trail in that location.
So I guess in the interest of kind of parsing this out, I think there's the actual Linder Memorial Trail. There's the fencing down at the base of the bluffs. To me, that's kind of combined with the jute matting that would go there too. And then there's Parker Creek as kind of the three things. Does anybody have a desire to divide it out further than that? Or
That's fine. With it.
Well, unless we have an objection, I think we've heard a little bit about the fencing and the type of fencing. Right now, it's metal, plastic clad metal fencing. And I'm not sure that we can meet the design. If materials and colors used in construction shall be selected for compatibility.
Green.
Sure it is, but most of the stuff up there on the bluff, most of the time is not necessary.
anyway, to be clear, you're suggesting the deer fencing doesn't meet the criteria.
Yes.
Okay, all right, just
Yes. Thank you for the clarification.
no, I just want to be on the same page.
I think I mean, parsing out that way, lumping the jute in with the fence is a little bit concerning to me because the jute is not going to be removed. It's not a temporary installation. For that matter, neither is solid. The various, logs and stems that will be heaped on top of the jute as well. I think that on Labor Day weekend, someone's gonna get down there and remove all of the rocks and stems.
To clarify on that point.
No, but the winter waves will.
The rocks that are going to be used, there's no material being brought down.
That's right.
Place on top.
Yeah,
It's
so
going to be
it's just
existing
material
rocks,
on the
material down there. Just to clarify, because I had that same question. And I
And it
had,
has to be taken from above the high tide.
and basically it's that narrow gravel.
Well, no, so last time we were at a site visit, we could see the high tide line from the night before, which was like a 7.2. And the mean high tide, I think, is 5.6. And the 7.2 didn't get up to the rocks that we're talking about where we put in fence. An 8 foot, might. So the rocky area just below the slope where it transitions to sand, that's not.
And before we dive in, one other question, the size of the sign, how was that decided upon? Because that.
The 24 by 30 sign, I believe, is a condition of their grant. The other signs are, probably 8.5 by 11. City.
Well, let's make the signage a fourth section to talk about.
Are you comfortable with the matting being, or would you like to see that?
No, I mean, I have overall concerns, like if indeed all that debris is going to be washed away next winter. It seems fully necessary to place it. So I don't know. We can talk about that when we get to it.
Okay.
We can lump them in together.
So then I guess just in the interest of clarity, let's do the Parker Creek Trail area, right? B, the actual Linger Memorial Trail. And then C, the beach bluff fencing, jute matting. And then D, the signage, or we can come to that when we get to the actual Linger.
Well, there's signage associated with the fence on the beach and the access. So
All right, so Parker Creek Trail.
Yeah, so this, I guess. Can you maybe better explain like this potential emergency CDP issue is?
It's a little vague in the city's ordinances. It is, something that's allowed under the Coastal Act. And so the official that is, tasked with administering the CDPs, which would be me, is authorized to issue a CDP to mitigate
I guess I'm asking about how you would get it open by Memorial Day, that using an emergency.
without using. Well, I think there's two possible ways. The city could proceed with the work at its own risk during the appeal period, and then it gets appealed and cross that bridge if you come to it. Or, and maybe we'll talk about it at our meeting tomorrow. Again, this was a suggestion from Coastal Commission staff. And, I went back and forth with them a little bit trying to figure this out because it is a little convoluted. It's not 100% clear to me. But I could issue an emergency permit to mitigate damage minimum necessary to mitigate whatever disaster that means. So, like I said, I think we talked about that it would include the jute, matting, and beach materials, the fencing on Axel Lindgren, repair at Parker Creek, but not the fencing on the beach. To me, it seems almost easier for the city to just proceed at its own risk during the period if there's approval. And then if it's not approval tonight, I don't know how that further complicates, emergency permit.
It comes down to some scheduling issues, and it was my understanding that the reason that we closed the trail last time was because we believed and agreed that it would be open again at Memorial Day.
Yeah.
So it's still the plan?
That is still the plan, and it sounds like Eli said that both Samara and RCA can get started with them in a matter of days. So, once we have planning commission approval, again, I think there's the appeal period, but city can proceed at its own risk.
And that was your objection, not objection, but your point earlier that the appeal period goes beyond the Memorial Day weekend. Okay. Would you like to entertain a motion?
Yeah. Is there any more discussion on the Parker Creek?
I think we should. I'm not making a motion, but
Well, I'll make a motion. Make a motion, and this is
Like this one, A?
Yes. Motion A. I move that we accept the findings of this staff report as conditioned to move forward as quickly as possible for the reopening. That we move forward with the repairs necessary to reopen Parker Creek Trail by the Memorial Day weekend.
Can we assign a date to that?
Sorry.
Can we assign a date, like the Friday before preceding?
Sure.
yeah, right.
Whatever that date is, I don't know what it is.
Ready?
I second that.
Right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. 2A about the Parker Creek Trail. All right, B is Atchalinger Memorial Trail.
I think that I mean, this is slightly contingent upon letter C, but it seems to me though, that if there's a snow fence along the beach, telling people not to enter all along the beach for 100 feet at least each way, and not having a second fence at the bottom of the trail at the top of the scarp where it's eroded is a little redundant. And so I would be in favor of a fence at the top and not at the bottom of the trail, pending if we're going to put a snow fence on the beach. And I think a wooden fence or the snow fence in lieu of the green vinyl fence or vinyl coated metal fence. Actually, more aesthetically pleasing and will be effective enough to. I'm also, I would also like to add a condition that I guess the management team come up with a temporary solution to reopen the trail. I want to say sooner than the November 9th date, but at least by November 9th date. Trail is slated, or when the temporary closure is slated to end, the trail is slated to reopen.
Something akin to fixing the cable
Yeah,
log stairs.
we've heard a few options tonight.
The ladder was very intriguing.
Hand tool work to, carve out some steps, put in a temporary ladder, put in some quick cable ladder steps. There's some temporary options that could reopen the trail.
If I could ask a question, or make a comment. So the fence at the top, you're saying to have a wooden slab? Or fencing that has opening to preserve the use?
Yeah, that's what I'm suggesting. It would be a wooden fence that's 4 feet tall rather than a wire fence that's 6 feet tall. And
Yeah, the wire fence was going to be 5 feet.
okay, so give me 5 feet tall.
Yeah. And if we did a wood fence, we probably should do also 5 feet. The intent was that they didn't want to have anyone utilizing that trail, would rather go to Parker Creek. But then the question I would have, and Trevor might help out with the vista and the view, because we do have some households and the bed and breakfast above, and I don't know if they would complain if the view is obstructed and if they have a right to that view.
I think it's aesthetics is subjective. I see advantages and disadvantages of both. Being able to see through the fence might be preferable to some people. Having a natural looking fence, even if you can't see through it, might be preferable. It's the language in the findings is structures, including fences over 3 feet high, I think would be allowed to significantly block views. Roads, trails, or inside residences located uphill. Would a 4 foot fence be a significant view blockage? Probably, maybe not 4 feet. You're getting up at 5 feet, maybe.
Like I was just thinking on that note too, with the lack of a better term, the curvature, the drop off that naturally occurs there. I think it'd be very easily situated to where even in theory, a solid fence would be only obscuring the view of vegetation behind it.
Slightly, yeah.
And while I appreciate views are subjective, I would suggest that most people are trying to view not so much the vegetation right there. So it could be situated, wooden one.
If we're too low, I mean, we don't want it too low on the slope where someone could just get over it. But yeah, I mean, certainly the coyote brush that's growing around there is.
But I'd
I'd
suggest,
like to bring that up because the last thing we need is we're trying to make these improvements to reopen Parker Creek and reopen Old Palm Beach. Didn't want to have on top of that, complaining about their being obstructed. Creates another layer of issues, which staff already has enough issues that we're dealing with right now. So we certainly don't need more. So that's why I want to bring that up.
Well, I would almost submit that a 6 foot, I'm sorry, you were going to do a 6 foot fence with the green.
5 foot.
So I would submit that a 5 foot fence with the kind of spacing for openings versus a 4 foot wooden slat fence where the slats are probably 6 inches apart. Isn't that much difference?
They're closer together if we use the same connections.
So if you're looking at the photos that you gave us, they're pretty, some of them are pretty far apart. My point being is that, as you said, it's kind of a compromise, but I, in my mind, it more easily adapts to the environment of that area. And not that I am suggesting this, but if someone has a problem with the view, this is appealable to the city council.
and another condition of approval for this one. I guess we're clarifying things since we're going to talk about signage later. It relates to signage. So with for me, with the approval for what we're talking about for the actual Lindgren, signs are not a part of that, to be clear. This section B, are we all on the same page there? I just want to be clear so as you're trying to construct what these look like after the fact.
I appreciate that.
Right, signage later, because I have a thought on that. Okay. That sounds like the suggestion is a question on the bottom, the fencing that's currently planned, we're not there yet. Are there returns planned on that? So it's obviously going to be parallel to the bluff. Are there returns planned on that up to, or could there be?
Yeah, it would probably kind of curve in towards the bluff, or, there's a rocky point just to the west of Axel Lindgren. So we were kind of thinking of bringing it in there. And then sort of a big log at the other end at the 350 feet. How much fencing did you buy? 400 feet?
300 is all they have.
300, okay. So I mean, we were kind of looking at, maybe a little bit less and not extending it past the Axel Lindgren. So I understand your point that if there's a fence already crossing at the base of Axel Lindgren, then maybe the fence at the bottom isn't necessarily, but if the fence doesn't go all the way past the Axel Lindgren Trail on the beach, then there's more of a need for the fence.
But also the intent of that fencing is to preclude people from scrambling up onto the bluff. Just having an open line parallel with no ends on it is pretty pointless because I can just walk around the side of it if it doesn't return back in and actually protect what we're trying to protect here with this, right?
So it probably makes sense to do it from a point to a point.
In an arc kind of fashion.
Yes.
Yeah, it would be from a point to a point. Ballpark, Steve Allen was thinking around 15 feet. But we just wanted to make sure that it did extend.
What do you mean by that? 15?
You're talking about the one that would have gone at the bottom of Axel Lindgren?
No, sorry, we were kind of trying to
talk about the other
on
one
the bluff itself or on the beach itself to understand how it ties into that, because again, things are independent, but they're not.
Yeah, I'm not sure how that would work. So, in theory, it makes sense that, yeah, if we go beyond actually lingering, but this is something we navigate right.
There's definitely, yeah, I think if we went beyond Axel Lindgren, it'd have to go all the way to that rocky point, and there's a willow hanging down and kind of anchored. And I think that's, yeah, we'd probably anchor it to willows.
Because you talked about 100 foot west of Axel Lindgren, right?
Yeah, which is about where that rock. So, yeah, so that's the max.
Yeah.
That's the max, yeah.
Yeah, that's what they were suggesting, meeting from the Huron Ancestral Society. But we were going to try and figure out what was practical, because it was just like throwing out there. It would be from that point all the way down to that other on the east side, which was like,
It's a big log, yeah. big.
large spot, yeah, which seemed like a really long stretch. Yeah, because when we talk about 300 feet or even 400 feet, I think it would be less than that whole stretch.
Maybe even like where this arrow is pointing, that might be another. This aerial photos. Yeah, so I mean, one of the things is we want to leave a little bit of flexibility to make some decisions.
Is it possible, regardless of fence material, that the top of the fence is no higher than ground level of that landing where the lighthouse used to sit? Like, could we theoretically just have one chain that says trail goes 15 feet ahead, and then down below, indeed have whatever the material, a completely, impermeable fence that prevents intent trespassing. I think there's some fairly thick thickets down there. Is that true? You'd have to really want to get past it.
Yeah, I don't know exactly the slopes. I mean, certainly if you're standing there, you can probably see pretty long way down, but is it really going to?
I guess my point is that I think it's possible to very effectively close the trail without necessarily obscuring views.
It could also be a good way to mitigate the obnoxiously large sign.
To put it further down.
Put it down there on the fence, yeah.
Grantees get a little, grantors get a little persnickety about that.
Yeah, well, look at the big storm.
Yeah, right.
So as I'm hearing the things we've kind of talked about, Tristan, you suggested the top, but not the bottom for the fencing.
Yeah.
And this is specific to the actual Henry Memorial Trail.
Correct.
And then a condition of approval for an alternate route by, at the very latest, at November 9th.
Yeah, I would say
A temporary interim solution.
a temporary solution to reopen the trail. I would ask the management team that we could see it by our July meeting, but no later than, I guess it would be the October meeting when we will have to readdress the closure.
Now, I wouldn't recommend conditioning anything on requiring the management team to do anything. One way to do it would be a recommendation.
Can we require the city to do something instead?
Well, you can require that we, discuss it with the management team. I don't think.
Could I try a couple of words?
Yeah.
Actually, on page 18 of the staff report, second paragraph says the TAS has received a grant from the 7th Generation Fund, et cetera, to study redesign and restoration options for the Aquiline Memorial Trail. I would just suggest then that we say, as part of that study, to examine temporary measures necessary to reopen the trail by November. See if the grant will allow that to happen. Because when you say restoration options, that's an option.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could.
And SHN is doing the work.
GC.
I'm sorry. But that was a bad one.
I'm not sure about the word restoration. That's a way to open it, but it's not a way to restore it.
Restore access.
Well, that's, yeah, but I mean, I know the way they were using for restoration was to improve.
Well, to me, restore means you restore it back to its original conditions.
How about direct staff to explore options for temporary repair at management team, at upcoming management team meetings and report back recommendations? I don't think we can guarantee much more than that.
Could we, as a condition, request that they develop a plan to restore temporary access?
Sure, recommend requests, yeah.
You know, I mean, I have the management plan up in front of me, and I mean, there's a lot of things that have been agreed to here a lot of years ago, but one of them is that the trail requires continuous monitoring and possibly seasonal maintenance by the property owner, particularly after season, you know, a lot of, I'm sure this has been referenced heavily by the group as they're coming up with these options, right? There's a lot of things, but I mean, this is just routine maintenance potentially of the existing trail while we pursue these other options to try and restore that back to usable.
And I mean, it certainly wouldn't preclude going down the road. It should, you know, I can't guarantee what action might come out.
They're suggesting that staff takes that as a.
Yeah, you can direct staff to bring this up at the management.
So in essence, just to recap, directing staff. What?
To encourage the management team to develop a temporary solution a temporary solution in order to reopen ALMT. Exactly.
To direct staff to encourage the management team to explore and develop temporary solutions to reopen Axel Lincoln Memorial Trail as soon as possible. What was that?
Sorry.
Yeah, as soon as possible.
Yeah, I like as soon as possible. I also like request versus encourage.
Thank you.
Encourage is one thing. I understand request is non-binding as well, but encouraging is a little bit.
Is there an argument to be made that it may not be possible? Or like we use the terminology as soon as possible. Or maybe it's just not possible, so keep waiting.
That would be.
I think that's a potential outcome.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
If we get to that, we'll get to that. I think anything is possible.
I mean, I think
there was.
you, as part of this decision, you can't commit the city to doing something that like city hasn't already committed to doing. You know, I mean, I think other than having staff do actions, but like you can't say, okay, the city will repair the access. That just might. The city council doesn't want to spend money, maybe So, be careful.
I mean, my concern is that while that temporary closure is at the moment set to expire in November, it sounds, and from what you mentioned earlier, that there's going to be a trail closure in place until next Memorial Day. If there's any way we could expedite that.
We could move to reopen it.
Well, that was not on the agenda for tonight's meeting.
I mean, naturally, as it stands right now, my understanding and clarifying some points from the public with you, Trevor, is that it expires unless action is taken. And action has to be noticed, and the whole process is to be gone through again. So in essence, November 9th, the trail closure is over as it stands right now, regardless of any work or planning done. But I think it's in the best interest of everybody to come up with a temporary, safer solution to deal with some of the liability concerns and the access concerns. The cable, log ladder is not great anymore. It hasn't been for a long time, but
I mean, I'm fine with that condition as we did it.
I mean, what's going to happen is come November or October, when the closure is going to expire. If there's not a temporary solution, it's going to come before us, asking us to extend it, and we'll revisit it at that point. I'll say how that will go, but if we want to make it open sooner, it sounds like we would need to get it on the agenda at this next meeting. So, I mean, I guess we have the ability to just make it open if we want to. Sure,
probably to discuss, which, yeah.
Well, okay, except let's be, if we do that, we open ourselves for an appeal immediately. So I personally, I think we're in the weeds. I think we need to step back a little bit. I think we've given sufficient direction to staff to come up with some solutions. I agree with you. We'll look at this again in November. In the meantime, as part of the monthly readout that we get from staff, both at the Planning Commission and City Council, we can discuss where they're at with their options. I think that's the best as we can do under the circumstances.
And if we get some consensus on a temporary solution, we'll certainly bring that back to you to agenda.
So is there a motion
I think we still haven't.
Maybe figured out the fences.
Yeah.
at the top and the bottom, right?
Yeah, and I mean, so the bottom fence, like you were saying, is contingent on, so do you want to say no bottom fence if the beach fence extends past Axel Lindgren Trail, or do you just want to say no bottom fence? One, and then what do you want the fences to?
Well, okay, I'll say, I think it makes sense to make the fencing consistent throughout the whole project. So my feeling is make the fence all the same, which was what we call the snow fence or the sand fence. I am not as hard over as having that fence at the bottom of the trail versus the fence that is on the beach. I think if we can wrap it like we've been talking about, that is acceptable to me. Let's face it, no matter what we do, someone will figure out a way to try to do something nefarious. So I think wrapping it single design or single type of fence for all the locations is what I would recommend.
So if I could comment,
So as a result of our meetings, we were forced, the Coastal Commission very concerned about wildlife. And we got the Department of Fish and Wildlife, go to our next time where we walked around there and looked at it. But the Coast Commission had a concern about that fence trapping wildlife,
Which fence?
the fence on the beach.
On the beach, okay.
So if you wrap it around, I think it would be even more trapping wildlife, possibly.
No, I think he just means wrap it around to either within some willows or to the edge of the bluff so that people can't just walk around it. They have to scramble around it and wildlife is so good. We're not gonna tie it, anchor it.
So the other option was just, we addressed the snow fencing on the beach as the way that one of these contractors would address it, along a particular stretch. And that when you look from the beach at the Axel Ingram Memorial Trail and the part that's eroded, which is what, maybe about 20 feet high or that's 15 feet high. So it would be right at the top of that, let's say 15 feet. And we could do that wooden fence, just like we want to have it there so that people wouldn't try to navigate through the rocks and everything, all of a sudden get to a fence that they're going to have a hard time if they try to get around it. I think it would, or you could have like the option of, because I'd like to leave it up to the contractor when they're doing it to see what really works. And here, first of all, we're not professionals in that respect. And secondly, once you're doing a project, even if you do a project around your house, a lot of times you end up tweaking things just because your original thought didn't quite work. So I think flexibility might help. But direction of what you're suggesting. But I think either one would work, and if this wraparound doesn't work, I think the other one would be a real good fix. Our city engineer had suggested the location of it being where all the erosion is at the base. So it'd be right at the top of where the erosion is.
At this moment, there's still remnants of the old wire log steps down there, right?
Yeah, parts of it, but you can use part of it.
That's pretty well deteriorated, right? Would it removing that, remove a queue that is an access point? I'm of the opinion that if this trail is going to be closed, let's close the trail. Let's remove, any queue that there's a trail. Let's make the fences that we've got as impenetrable as possible. Like if we're going to close it, let's close it.
It is. What's down there, that little ladder with the wooden, it's missing at least a couple of those. So, it really is not in a proper condition as it is. So it makes sense just to totally remove.
But it's still a queue. There is a trail.
Exactly.
Argue that we could get rid of that.
Yeah. I would just say I appreciate that, but I'm hesitant to remove any infrastructure until we know what we're going to do. I'd hate to remove something and go, oh, you know what? Gosh, we could have used that for this or that.
I don't mean, destroy or dispose of it, but like coiling it up and putting it in the reeds.
Yeah, we would just buy another one if that's the route we want to take. Because it's got like wire on the end and then the wooden, so it's almost like a ladder that's flexible. It just sort of like lays there. But it's missing a couple pieces. So, it's really broken. So as a result, it's better to, if once we want to reopen it, if we want to reopen it and use that same concept, just to buy a new one to lay on there, not to utilize the existing version of it. Because I think it comes already intact. It's not like we built it together. It already comes where you would drape it over, and it already has the wire or metal or whatever on the outside, the wooden bars in the middle as steps.
I suggest just, and guilty myself, to Richard's point, we're getting a lot of the details. I think right now we're just talking about placement of fencing at the top of the bottom of the trail. It's kind of what we agendized to discuss, and not so much the detailed nitty gritty of how the work was to be done.
My suggestion was just that removal of that queue almost serves in lieu of a fence, right? Like removing a cube is akin to placing an obstacle. Removing access is akin to placing an obstacle. That was my suggestion.
I think you could, not require it, but if you suggested it or authorized it as part of the project, that if, on the ground, the contractor, because I don't know what it would take to remove it. Additional erosion or something. Disturbance of cultural resources, but you can leave the option open.
Let's make reopening it harder.
And I would suggest maybe in terms of the fencing, maybe if the fencing along the beach doesn't extend past the Axel Lindgren Memorial Trail, then authorize the fence at the bottom. If it does extend beyond west of the Axel Lindgren Memorial Trail, then no fence at the bottom.
Yeah.
Take a stab at a motion.
Yeah, I move that fence at the top of Axel Lindgren Memorial Trail be made of the same snow fence as other fences in the project. And that if this fence along the beach does not get put in place or does not extend to the bottom of the trail, and there'd be a fence at the bottom of the trail of the same material. And I recommend that staff request the management team to search and propose a temporary opening plan for the Axel Lindgren Memorial Trail.
Just want to make sure she gets it all down. Is that consistent with your recommendation for a recommendation?
Yeah, actually, I guess I wasn't listening to that closely. I was just referencing my previous quote.
That's what I wanted to make sure.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll second.
Okay, all those in favor? Aye. Motion carries.
Need a minute break.
Yeah, we'll take a quick 2-minute bio break for everybody. Yeah, good. Yeah. I'd rather do one or what?
Oh. Yeah, take care of this.
Okay. I was able to predict.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, well, it's the nerd block. No. Got a key on it. Get straight back and learn. Yeah. Yes.
Well, I was thinking, yes.
Yeah.
There's definitely, yeah, I mean. And it's, you follow the strictly Robert's rules of order, which communities do, they have to use that small. Yeah. Yeah, yes, I think, some of the STR discussions, there's been a few others. Where, but yeah, usually we can. That's what you get for procrastinating, you get it the last minute. Your students.
Since I gave them lots of opportunities to get a buy procrastination. I think the way it's ended. I feel like I just took credit for surviving. My wife and I both returned. My wife and I just returned full time and work. First time my uncles. Yeah, most of the time, I'm like physically engaged. I'm saying that. Yeah,
Prior to the surgery, I wouldn't have been able to sit this long continuously. So some people successful.
Yes.
It's a win. I'll take it. I'll take it.
Yeah.
Like floating bodies in there. The tears was pinched in the capsules so that it's snip. Yeah, it wasn't able to repair that. I guess it just. Stay on, do him longer. It's in my future.
Are you gonna set off the security?
No, nothing.
No.
Yeah, nothing was added. Unless it was left in by mistake.
It's just chilly, man. Here's what I have. Yeah. I do a good job. It's accidents.
Yeah.
Maybe the city owes me. online.
I think like if you're buying a car, so the taxes are calculated based on zip code.
Yeah, zip code of resident.
Every time you buy a car, we have to absolutely insist that they go and look at the,
Interesting, yeah.
because they want to charge the city tax, even though we're in the zip code for but the county part of the city.
Talking up to your donation to the city road.
No, no. I've donated enough.
Town. Trails.
Trails.
Vegetation days.
All right, thank you, everyone. We'll be back in session now, continuing on with 2B, which is the beach fencing.
Oh,
So, excuse me, C, 2C, which is the beach fencing.
wait,
I thought B
that was
actually-
3.
Yeah, C was beach fed bluff. I wrote down beach bluff, but whatever.
My understanding was just the beach, or was just the Axel Lindgren Trail, top and bottom. Yeah, fencing.
Yes,
So now we're moving on to the fencing, the snow.
yes,
fencing.
but wouldn't that be number 3?
Yes.
C.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Wait, what did we just agree to? Okay.
I can't
And
wait to
this
see
is-
the minutes on this one.
Yeah. Good luck, Anton. All right, so
And this is the jute matting and the fence, right? And main stuffer.
My big issue here or hang up would be the cameras.
Okay,
I mean, I don't know exactly where the cameras were. They weren't proposed, but where they were thought about being placed with no cameras. The whole
Yeah.
time.
okay, makes sense.
It's my.
other than that, the proposal is potentially up to 100 feet west of the bottom of the Axel Lindgren, extending no more than 400 feet east. Is that a total of 500 or a total of 400?
Oh, no, that, a total, I think really that total is actually 350. I just rounded up to 400 just to be safe because we weren't actually out with the tape and it,
Right.
moves around.
So potentially 100 roughly west and then 100 east towards Parker Creek.
So 100 west of Axel Lindgren and, up to 300 feet east of Axel Lindgren. But likely it's really gonna be like 200 to 300. But Eli only got 300.
I think, yeah, I'm sure we can get as far as. Not a big hang up.
I guess one. Are we very sure that this fence is being placed above the mean high tide line? Or we're not exposing the city to liability by putting it in state property?
Yes, and we've been down there with coastal commission staff. We have, it's without a survey, it's difficult. But yeah, it's pretty clear. We have, pretty reliable LiDAR data for recent years that we can get the elevation off of. But yeah, it extends, like I said, it's like 5.8 feet. It extends down the beach pretty far. We saw the high tide line from the 7.2 tide. We're down there and it was below the rocks.
Just to help me understand the rationale for it being away from the edge of the slope as opposed to right up against it.
Because we don't want people we don't want people getting too close to the bluff. Some materials have sloughed off and come down. One and two, because there's some pretty good sized rocks up there and it's gonna be harder to place the fence. So we're talking about putting it right where the sand and the rocks meet.
I have a couple of questions. In the report, it says that there will be no foreseeable significant environmental impacts. I was curious who determined that. Was it the Fish and Game or Fish and Wildlife folks? Eli mentioned that there may have been some concern about environmental
Well,
impacts.
yeah, so that was one of the concerns that Coastal Commission brought up. So we invited someone from California Fish and Wildlife staff to come down, and he didn't have any concern. You know, it's you know, falls under an exemption. I mean, you could argue that there's an exception, but no, I don't. I mean, I do CEQA, so I guess that's.
And the fence is mounted on wooden T-posts or something.
I believe it's metal.
Or
I think so.
metal.
Yeah, probably the same. Yeah, they're 5 foot.
They're real bare to get out of the ground. Is there anything on that one?
I'm fine with, as we have modified it.
And just to clarify, sorry, the purpose of the fence is exclusively to prevent people from crossing the area. There's no other goal.
And the jute matting is, you know, one, it covers up some of the exposed areas. But also the idea behind that was then it, you know, presents as more of a restoration project as opposed to, oh, here's just this fence randomly. And so, you know, some of the signage we'll talk about. And I don't know if it's going to say restoration or, you know, erosion control in progress or, you know, something like that, that hopefully people won't.
I just had a request on the original condition number 2 that would apply to this on page 14 or packet page 29, talking about the burial on local beach. Just to clean up the language, the last sentence that begins with all fencing material will be removed between Labor Day and no later than September 30th, 2023. And then responsibility city manager while fencing is in place, end sentence. That really clarifies that for me. Here to make a motion.
Well, okay. I move to approve the installation of the beach-based wooden fencing mat as conditioned.
Not being here.
As conditioned is what, yeah. And well, that was one of the, I'm sorry, yes, no cameras.
Second.
I second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, unanimous, passes. Next, signage. The only signs I saw specifically proposed in here, Trevor, were the for lack of a better term, acknowledgement signs for the grant. Is that correct? But then
Yeah.
I heard you mentioned something about potential restoration work in progress signs, which I didn't see.
So, yeah, that's the one that's the only one we have some specifics on, in terms of what it's proposed to be. The other ones, I think there's more flexibility. We've got some ideas about wording and size, but that hasn't been determined yet. So, you can either approve it with some flexibility, or if you want to put some guidelines on that.
Can we? I mean, I think signage down along the beach regarding why the area is closed for restoration, vegetation, whatever we want to call it. Those should be 8.5 by 11s. Line on that for size. I guess the only sign that quite large is the one funding the project. That's like almost an advertisement right there. I guess that's the point, but I mean, could we put that sign just down on the beach instead? Or, I don't know. Maybe I'm the only one who has an opinion on signs, but open to other ideas.
I had a thought on that. The size grabbed my attention too. I actually called it a tape measure at home as I was reviewing my packet. Perhaps conditioning it to the smallest size that meets the grant requirements. So that way, if this is truly a grant requirement, which we don't know, you said you thought that, but if it's a smaller, I'm very much in favor of that. But I also am sensitive to the value of having the funding to look at these options. That.
Sure. Yeah.
So the only other sign that that we have talked about, I'm hoping that we can combine it with the restoration sign, is directions to the Parker Creek Trail from excuse me, from the actual Lincoln Trail. So I don't disagree with the 8.5 by 11 size, but it might have to be just a little bit bigger if we want to combine those two messages in one place, which I think from my perspective makes more sense than having another sign that says go this direction to get to the beach. So I guess what I'm saying is minimize the size of the sign, yet ensure that the messages are clear.
Yeah, that's the other thing I think would be valuable to include on the signs is like it can be in small print, but like a reference to these that are approving said project. So that way curious people could see why the heck things are the way they are.
I think I would also encourage whoever's drafting these signs, because anytime you encounter a no trespassing sign, you're running a cost benefit analysis, right? Clearly indicate that there is, irreparable damage if you go through these closed areas. Resources.
Her question, is it implied or understood that the approval is only during the closures? And so, for example, the gratitude sign to the 7th Generation Fund is only authorized during this closure.
Ooh, that's a good
And
question.
not in perpetuity.
I guess I don't know what their grant specifies, but they wanted it on this fencing, so I guess
On the
if
temporary fence.
on the temporary fencing, so if they need it longer, then they'll have to come back.
Okay, so, if you want to limit it to the extent of the restoration. So in other words, it could be up now, it could stay up until they finish their improvement. Because, you know, they're having the first phase, meaning GHD doing a report, and then after that, you know, they're going to be doing. So if there's a big gap in between there, then we might want to say take the sign down. But then when you're doing the restoration, the actual work, then that's when I'm sure that's when they really want the sign up, showing that they're doing a project that's funded by seventh generation.
I think what he was getting at is that the sign, the TAS are proposing to mount it on this fence. But the
Right.
fences will only be there as long as the trails.
Oh, I see what you mean.
So if we reopen the trail and take out the fence and they still need their sign, we'll have to.
Find another way.
Yeah.
to put it. Okay, I see what you mean.
It's not explicitly stated here, but condition could be just that the sign isn't fixed to temporary fencing. It doesn't actually say where the sign gets posted. It's fixed to the fencing, then removing the fencing itself.
So I'm just going to mention this because you guys were talking about the weeds before. So right now, the direction you're giving us is really, really getting into the weeds. And you know, you have the right, but I would suggest that you know, we talk instead of 8.5 by 11, or talk about everything on one side, or talk about including this also on that side. The number one, you say, you know, whatever sign you have, maybe possibly might be more than one, you know, not to be larger than a particular size. So, you know, so if we do it 7 by 11, or if we do it, you know, 12 by 15, and you know what I mean? So it creates more flexibility, you know, so not larger than a particular size. And then the other thing is suggesting if we could include it on one side, but not precluding of having maybe two signs. One, I mean, a big arrow, detour, Parker Creek Trail, and Walker Street Trail, or you know, yeah, as one thing. And then the other one would be having a sign that says that the trail is closed, you know, whatever reason, you know. But so in other words, that it could be two signs, you know. Just one. I'm just saying, give a little bit of flexibility, so that it could be possibly two signs, but generally not larger than X. Because I agree, the other size of the sign is.
Yeah, if we didn't use the word minimize,
Right.
that's the operative word. And that could be for both the amount of signage and the size.
That's good. That sounds good. Okay.
Maybe wording as the size and number minimized to G.
With the preference to co-locate information where possible. And affixed to temporary fencing. Right. I just say, since I don't know that necessarily needs to be in this, but since you're here, Eli, and this, everything keeps pointing to city manager, I'm sure you're going to defer to staff, you know, to do this, but I'd strongly encourage an inventory of the number of signs. So that way, as things get checked, we know whether or not one blew away, both replacement and just shoot, one of our signs is missing.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we always check.
But we don't know how many we start with, how many,
Right.
You know. Take a stab at this motion.
I was just going to note that when you said having it on the fence, I did like Chris's idea of possibly having like rope or a chain simply put the sign up there, right where we currently have the barricades. And then possibly just right after that, so it would be a little bit lower, would actually be the whole fence. So that this signage could actually exist where that either chain or rope would be where the current barricades are. And then the other sign would be after it, maybe a few more feet or whatever, just to the point where it could actually drop a little. So that the signage doesn't necessarily have to be on the fence, but could be on the rope or chain.
Next to the temporary barriers.
Yeah.
Okay, I move that the signage for the project be advised to size and number needed to convey necessary information, and that it be affixed to the temporary barriers.
Okay, all those in favor?
I,
Okay, motion carried unanimously. Okay, anything outstanding from item 2, A through D? Given the lateness of the hour, I'm not sure quite how to do this, but I would suggest that we defer agenda item 3 until our next scheduled meeting. Is there any objection to that from anybody present in the room or online? Seeing none.
If anybody has any pressing comments?
Sherry, I think is raising her hand.
Oh,
It has nothing to do with your agenda and finishing up the night. Appreciate everybody's long hours. I was just going to ask a question regarding the Shuri management team. And I believe that City of Trinidad is a member. And I know that Eli comes and your staff come. But have you thought about maybe a council person coming to that meeting? And I don't know if that's possible or not, but it doesn't really specifically say who on the City of Trinidad should attend those meetings. Just like the York Tribe, it doesn't say it has to be the chairperson or whatever. It just says York Tribe. So I was wondering if that's something to think about and consider so that there seems to be a little bit more transparency with what's happening in that meeting. So that was just a thought. Given that thought, when things come forward to the Planning Commission, you have to make sure we're not in a conflict area or situation. So that's what I was thinking about when you were all talking about the Shuri management team and just figuring out how to be a little bit more transparent with you all and with the City of Trinidad council members. Thank you again for your hard work.
thanks, Sherry.
I just wanted to note, Sherry, based upon your comment and question. So when we came up with the G2G plan, government to government, we also were addressing standing committees and determined that the Shuri management team is a standing committee. And as a result, because it is a standing committee, it needs to be open in order to have council members present. So we have had one meeting where we have had it open. We did have council members. So we can have 1 or 2 council members, but only if the meeting is open to the public. Lately, the meetings have been closed because we've been talking about cultural resources. But ideally, when we're talking about the Shuri management the area, the 12 and a half acres. Ideally, if we're talking about specific cultural resources, then we'll have it closed and we cannot have council members. Just talking about the fact that it is a cultural resource in general or something like that, then that should be open and should be open to the public. And that allows us to have council members present.
Thank you. Moving on the agenda, commissioner reports. Any commissioners have anything to report?
I may or may not be able to make a meeting next month. I'll be away. Hopefully I can attend remotely.
Right. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you all. I'm cold and hungry, so that's.
All right. Anything else? All right. Staff report. Trevor, is there more you need to say?
No. I think between this and I've been working on the ordinance amendments, getting those on the council agenda, housing related ones. It's been taking up a lot of my time. I worked on some of the WTS permits today. So yeah, so just plugging away on, trying to get the grant tasks done that are.
Future agenda items, any changes or suggestions to that?
I was going to make a suggestion, but I'll table it, but I will just say briefly, I think that just having this list is really of an unadded value, just as it is. Perhaps there's a way in which, and I've got some suggestions, but I won't go into them tonight. Don't worry about it, but I think there's a way in which maybe we can get off top dead center on some of these. It would really be useful to have a discussion about how to do that and think about priorities and specific issues and challenges to getting them done, et cetera. So that's as far as I'm going to take it tonight.
There was previously some mention of having workshops to try to address it.
Again, that might be part of a way to move forward on some of these things. So, yeah.
Do we need a specific agenda item to discuss that, or is that just fall into this for the next meeting?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, no, I think that'll be a great discussion. Yeah. All right, with that, we are adjourned.